Hey guys, tonight we're doing something you will absolutely regret. You've been invited to a medieval sub-feast. And, because you're the curious, open-minded, maybe slightly reckless soul you are, you accept. A word of warning before we dig into the roasted peacock and scandal: you probably won't survive this, like genuinely. Between the dodgy meats, wine that could strip paint, and the fact that seating arrangements often led to straight-up stabbings, this is one of those historical adventures where your modern immune system, manners, and sense of personal space will betray you at every turn. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and the time in the comments. I want to know who's tuning in from where and how late you're staying up with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all starts with a scroll, a real wax-sealed invitation delivered by a messenger who smells like wood smoke and horse sweat. You're not a noble, not even close. You're a random time traveller who just fell out of a haystack, but someone or something wants you at this feast. Maybe you're the honoured guest, or maybe you're the entertainment. The script is vague. Either way, the summons comes with a warning: wear your finest, arrive before sunset, and don't come empty-handed. And so the panic begins, because you have nothing that remotely passes for finest for 14th century terms. You're in joggers. You try to trade with a local merchant and end up wrapped in wool, linen, and something that smells like goat but costs like gold. The doublet squeezes your ribs like a medieval corset, the hose itches, and the shoes are made entirely of bark. You're not sure, but they are aggressively unsupportive. In this moment you realise something key. Medieval fashion isn't just about status, it's a full-on survival test. The sun's starting to dip low, that golden honey hour casting light on muddy streets and crooked buildings. You make your way toward the Lord's Manor, which sits on a rise like it owns the sky. It probably does. As you approach, you start to notice people sizing you up, peasants giving side-eye, knights barely hiding their amusement. You're clearly an outsider, even if your tunic sort of fits now. You clutch the gift you brought, some clumsily forged kitchen knife you bartered for with what was left of your pride, and head toward the gate. Now, here's the first big historical fact. Feasts weren't just dinner parties. They were political weapons, social chess games, and occasionally just very expensive flexes. Kings and lords hosted these blowouts to show off wealth, intimidate enemies, and bribe allies with roast meat and endless wine. If you got invited, it meant something. Or it was a trap. There's a fine line. But here's your quirky bit of knowledge. Some medieval feasts featured actual edible table centerpieces, like sculptures made of butter or marzipan shaped like castles or animals, or, in one case, a fully armoured knight on the horseback. That's right. You could literally carve yourself a slice of butter dragon if you wanted, assuming no one else beat you to it with a dagger. As you cross into the outer courtyard, the smell hits you. Roasting meat, wood smoke, spiced wine, and something distinctly barnyard. It's intoxicating and confusing. A bard tunes his lute in the corner, chickens scatter underfoot, and a boy no older than 10 tries to offer you a bowl of something, steaming. You politely decline. He shrugs and throws it at a goat. This is where you notice the horses, rows of them, tied and restless. Nobles dismounting in embroidered cloaks and fur-lined sleeves. You suddenly feel very aware that you don't belong, and also that your shoes are leaking. The guards at the hall entrance give you a long look before waving you through. You step inside. The great hall is enormous. Stone walls, wooden beams blackened with smoke, and tapestries that depict everything from epic battles to saints with uncomfortable-looking eyes. Torches line the walls, casting flickering shadows. The air inside is a dense stew of voices, laughter, and the occasional clang of metal. Now here's where historians like to argue. Some say these halls were freezing cold, smoky and miserable to dine in. Others claim that clever architecture and hearths made them warm and inviting, especially in wealthy manors. The truth? It probably depended on where you sat and who you were. You're ushered toward a long trestle table already filling up with guests. Some wear gold rings on every finger, others just look mean. There's a hierarchy here, but it's too complex to decode quickly. You just try not to make eye contact with the man beside you gnawing on a turkey leg like it owes him money. As you sit, you notice your seat wobbles. No back, no cushion. Your knees knock against the underside. and across from you, a noblewoman is staring at you like you're part of the entertainment. You smile. She doesn't. Someone bangs a staff against the ground. The noise dies instantly. The lord of the manor enters. He's flanked by servants and what may be a jester, or possibly just a very drunk man in bells. The lord raises his goblet in welcome. He doesn't smile. You're not sure if that's ominous or just his face. And that's when it starts. The feast hasn't even begun, but your fate is already sealed. You're out of your depth, underdressed, and seated somewhere between a cutthroat mercenary and a noble who's already asking what your bloodline is. Spoiler alert, you don't have one. The noise returns gradually, like a tide rising. First low murmurs, then louder conversations, the scraping of wooden cups, the thud of tankards on tables. But you're still frozen, clutching your questionable goblet and trying to remember if you're supposed to toast, bow, or just blend into the shadows like a very awkward tapestry. The lord takes his place at the head of the room, on an actual elevated platform of course, beneath a canopy embroidered with lions, grapes, and a suspiciously smug-looking falcon. He doesn't say much, just raises his cup again and gives a short nod. That's the starting bell apparently. Pitchers arrive like cavalry. The first thing poured into your cup smells like someone soaked bread in apples and then forgot about it for 2 weeks. Mead. Sweet, thick, and deceptively potent. You drink because everyone else does, and because your nerves are doing the Macarena. The taste is not bad: honey, alcohol, and something floral. Then you cough a little, and your seatmate, a man in a hat that looks like it's made from 3 separate animals, thumps your back so hard you nearly faceplant into the table. This is your first medieval misstep: drinking too fast. Because here's a thing they don't mention in the fantasy books. Feasts often started with pre-gaming, actual hours of sipping wine, mead, or ale before the food even touched the table. The goal? To relax, to get chatty, to make bad decisions with powerful consequences, and to start sweating under your woolen doublet, which you are now absolutely doing. A second goblet appears, then a third. You start to realise that the servants are moving in a rhythm. They pour, they retreat, they return. One of them, a kid barely taller than the table, is carrying a pitcher almost bigger than his torso. He stops in front of you and stares. No words, just a twitch of his eyebrow. Is that disapproval? You push your goblet toward him and receive a refill so generous it spills over onto your tunic. The kid does not apologise. He moves on. As you sit in the growing puddle of fermented honey, you start to notice things. For one, no one seems to be drinking water. Not a single drop. That's not just oversight, it's survival. In medieval Europe, water was often contaminated. Wine and ale, with their alcohol content and longer fermentation, were safer bets. Even children drank what they called small beer, which had enough alcohol to kill microbes, but not enough to cause an 8-year-old to start a tavern brawl. Of course, the mead you're currently downing is not small. It's large, it's bold, it's probably brewed in a barrel that hasn't been cleaned since the Black Death. But it's doing the job. You feel your shoulders loosen, your jaw unclench. You even try a joke with the noblewoman across the table. It bombs. She blinks slowly, then turns away to chat with a man who looks like he owns land and possibly souls. Then comes the music. Lutes, hurdy-gurdies, flutes and drums begin playing in a corner of the hall. It's lively and fast, all lilting, notes and stomping rhythm, and it makes your heart jitter. One of the musicians is playing something that looks like a cross between a violin and a cheese slicer. He's grinning like a man who knows secrets. The tune changes every few minutes, swinging between jolly drinking songs and haunting, minor key melodies that make your spine hum. Suddenly there's a shout from the Lord's dais. The first course is coming, and the crowd responds, not with polite applause, but with full-on cheering. They're pounding their tables. Someone hurls a cup at the wall. The servants appear in a procession, each one holding a platter piled high with meat, real meat. Or what you pray is meat. A roasted swan, a suckling pig with an apple in its mouth. What might be a badger, something feathered and dramatically charred. They glide past you and your stomach roars like a dragon in heat. This finally is what you came for. This is the feast. But you don't get any. Not yet. Here's the hierarchy you hadn't prepared for. Seating equals status. The closer to the Lord, the better the food, the faster it arrives, and the hotter it is. You're 4 tables back. By the time a servant gets to you, he's carrying what looks like the leftovers of the leftovers. a leg of something, cold with a suspicious grey tinge. You take it anyway, because pretending to be above gnawing questionable meat is a luxury long gone. The taste is, honestly, not terrible. Salty, chewy, herby, possibly mutton, possibly owl. You chew with cautious enthusiasm. Someone passes a bowl of sauce, thick, greenish, with a smell that screams regret. You dip, you eat, you instantly regret. It's garlicky, vinegary, and made with something that has no place in polite cuisine. Your mouth feels betrayed. Your seatmate offers you more. You fake a cough and slide it back to him. That's when the horn blows, not metaphorically, an actual horn. Someone's decided it's time for a toast. A massive noble stands, raises a goblet the size of a bucket, and launches into a monologue that includes the phrase, "May your enemies rot in toads." Everyone cheers. You cheer too, slightly delayed. Now let's drop a weird fact in your lap. During some feasts, people would engage in drinking contests with rules so obscure they required referees. Like last man standing with a leg on the table wins the roast kind of rules. There's no contest happening here, yet, but you're already playing a dangerous game with your bladder and blood alcohol content. One of the musicians moves through the crowd, pausing at each table to collect tips or gossip. When he reaches yours, he plays a short tune just for you, something jaunty, possibly mocking. The table laughs, you smile, but internally you note that everyone here has clearly accepted the idea that the feast is less about food and more about status, spectacle, and staying conscious. And here's a point that scholars debate. How long did these feasts really last? Some say they went for hours. Others argue entire days weren't uncommon, with guests arriving, passing out, waking up, and eating again. Judging by the pace here, you suspect you're in for the long haul. Your cup is refilled again. You've lost count. The fire in the hearth is blazing now, and the room's heat is mixing with alcohol and nerves to form something dangerous. You can already feel your balance start to wobble, and you haven't even made it to the fish course. You begin to realise that surviving this feast isn't just about what you eat or drink, it's about endurance, physical, mental, and gastrointestinal. The meat parade is far from over, but before the next wave of food arrives, you've got to endure the gauntlet known as courtly mingling. A man to your left introduces himself with 3 titles and a handshake that's more like a medieval power move. His rings bite into your fingers. He asks about your estate. You mumble something about a far-off domain and hope he doesn't ask for specifics. He nods solemnly, clearly thinking you're either mysterious or very poor. Possibly both. That's when the fanfare blasts again, louder this time and accompanied by drums. The doors swing open like something from a melodramatic stage play, and a troop of servants march in carrying a creature so large it takes 4 men to hold the platter. A roasted ox, maybe, or a reassembled beast made from 3 other animals. It's covered in golden crust and smells like a medieval fever dream. Meat, spices, and desperation. One guy's holding a ladle the size of a shovel ready to serve. The crowd cheers again. Somewhere a child weeps with joy. Here's the trick. You're supposed to react. Feigned awe is a part of the ritual. You widen your eyes and clap, just a beat late, hoping no one notices. This is your first taste of the performance aspect of medieval dining. Feasts weren't just meals. They were ceremonies. A display of wealth, influence, and the ability to summon a swan stuffed with herbs and wrapped in pastry just to show your neighbours who's boss. Now, as the ox is carved and distributed table by table, you catch a whiff of your own personal suffering. You are sweating, profusely. The layers of itchy wool and fur are doing their job a little too well, and you're not alone. Across the table, a young noble's forehead glistens like glazed ham. He dabs it with his sleeve, shrugs, and resumes eating like a man on a mission. You shift in your seat and notice something else. You're sitting on what could generously be called a plank. One piece of creaky, splintery wood balanced on uneven legs. No cushion, no backrest, no grace. This isn't a chair. It's a test of core strength. Every time you lean forward to pick up your cup, you risk tipping over into your neighbour's lap. Not ideal. But in a medieval feast, the seating arrangement wasn't just uncomfortable. It was political warfare. The closer to the host, the better the food and the stronger the influence. The farther you sat, the lower your status. And you, dear time traveller, are somewhere near the peasant-adjacent region of the social spectrum. The noblewoman across from you still hasn't cracked a smile, but her companion, A thin man with a permanent smirk and questionable facial hair leans forward and offers you a bit of roasted something. You accept it, because declining food here might be taken as an insult punishable by slow social death. It tastes decent, until he informs you it's beaver tail, apparently a delicacy. You smile through a mouthful of regret. Let's drop in one historical gem. Medieval feasts often featured animals we'd never consider edible today. Peacocks roasted in their own feathers, porpoises for coastal royalty, and even hedgehogs stuffed with herbs. Yes, you heard that right, hedgehogs. The fringe fact? In some banquets, cooks would sew the skin and feathers of a bird back onto the cooked meat for dramatic effect. Nothing says power like biting into a bird that still looks like it could fly away. A servant returns to your table with more platters. Dishes are arriving in waves now. You can't identify half of them. There's a bowl of something gelatinous, a loaf of bread that might be mostly stone, and a salad made of pickled weeds. You try the bread, mostly out of desperation, and discover it's not quite food. It's a trencher. This, by the way, is your next cultural faceplant. Trenchers were the edible, or sometimes inedible, plates of the medieval world. Usually a slab of stale bread, thick and dry, used to soak up juices and support the messier meats. You weren't always supposed to eat them, especially if you were low-ranking. Often trenchers were collected after the meal and redistributed to the poor or animals, but hungry guests sometimes chewed them anyway, risking both shame and jaw dislocation. You take a tentative bite. It tastes like despair. Around you, the feast reaches a louder, messier stage. Servants rush back and forth, dodging elbows and tossed bones. A couple of them carry buckets, one for scraps, one for something you really don't want to think about. Music blares again. A troupe of dancers enters the hall and begins a circular routine that involves scarves, hand claps, and aggressive spinning. The noblewoman finally cracks a smile, but only when one of the dancers crashes into a wall. Somewhere behind you, someone retches, not discreetly. No one reacts. Apparently that's normal. This is the moment it hits you. There is no pacing here. You're either full speed eating or desperately trying not to breathe through your nose. The scent is a battlefield. Cooked meats, sweaty bodies, wine, and the subtle tang of someone's perfume that smells suspiciously like boiled rose petals and desperation. You consider standing up to walk it off, but your knees are wobbly, and your head is starting to swim. Here's a scholarly debate that keeps things spicy. How sanitary were these feasts really? Some argue that medieval nobility had better hygiene than we assume. Regular hand-washing, herbs to mask odours. Servants whose whole job was to remove filth. Others say no, it was a plague waiting to happen. Judging by the state of your hands, which have been handling food, wood, leather, and now a suspiciously wet goblet, you're leaning toward the latter. You notice the man next to you wiping his fingers on the tablecloth. Someone else is cleaning their knife with a piece of bread. Cutlery etiquette? There is none. Forks aren't even common yet in most places. Spoons exist, but mainly for stews. Knives are personal and usually decorative. If you forgot yours, which you did, you're stuck using your fingers, or awkwardly borrowing the communal dagger, which feels more like a challenge than an invitation. And here it comes, the moment you knew was inevitable. Someone bumps into you mid-sip. Mead spills all over your sleeve and into your lap. You yelp. A nearby knight snorts and says something that roughly translates to lightweight in Old French. You try to smile through it, but now your legs are soaked, your hands are sticky, and you're only halfway through the meal. You thought this was going to be an indulgent fantasy dinner. But here you are, sweaty, tipsy, mildly insulted, and gnawing cold meat off a piece of old bread. And the worst part? You still have at least 10 more courses to go. You sit back, blinking through the torchlight haze, your mead-soaked sleeves clinging to your forearms and your stomach making ominous gurgles. It's the kind of discomfort that would send you home early from a modern dinner party. But here, you're only on course 3, maybe 4. Hard to say since no one seems to be counting, and the food keeps appearing like it's being teleported in from a dimension where moderation is a sin. You brace yourself for another wave of meat. But instead, a servant plunks down a wooden tray holding tiny wriggling things. Are those eels? They are. Swimming in a dark, oily broth and still curling slightly, they stare up at you with lifeless eyes that scream, "This isn't even our final form." You try not to gag. The man beside you enthusiastically spears one with a knife and slurps it like it's spaghetti. You follow his lead with considerably less confidence. swallowing quickly and regretting it immediately. It's slimy, metallic and vaguely spicy. You're not even sure if it's cooked. And just as you think, well, at least it's over, another pitcher of mead is poured into your goblet by a hand that does not care whether you're still conscious. Here's something you should know. At this point in a feast, you're not just eating, you're performing. Every bite, every sip, every laugh is part of your unspoken social audition. That's why you're not allowed to stop drinking, even though your head feels like it's full of cotton and bees. Your limbs are losing coordination. You're warm, no, hot, and your doublet is now plastered to your back with a mixture of sweat and spilled sauce. The person across the table looks vaguely familiar, but their face is warping like a painting left in the rain. That's the mead. It's kicking in, hard, and in comes the entertainment. The doors swing open again, and the hall fills with a high-pitched whistle followed by the pounding of drums. Enter dancing bears. Yes, actual bears, wearing collars, led by handlers with whips and raw meat. The crowd erupts into claps and cheers as though this is the most reasonable thing in the world. One of the bears climbs onto its hind legs and starts hopping in a circle. Another sits on a stool and pretends to play the drum with its paws. You're too drunk and overwhelmed to even form a reaction, other than an audible, "What the hell?" that no one hears over the noise. This, by the way, is not a fringe myth. Bears were a popular form of medieval entertainment, especially during feasts hosted by nobility. If it wasn't bears, it was fire eaters, sword jugglers, trained monkeys, or jesters who told jokes that bordered on actionable slander. The idea was simple: impress your guests, distract them from the terrifying hygiene standards, and make sure the boredom never had time to settle in. You, unfortunately, are not impressed. You're horrified. Mostly because the bear just made eye contact with you and you're pretty sure it doesn't like you. And speaking of terrifying hygiene standards, someone just sneezed into the gravy. Loud, wet, unapologetic. The reaction? A few laughs and a servant who calmly removes the bowl and replaces it with another. You don't even want to know where that second one came from. You glance around and realise that nobody's washing their hands. Like, at all. Sure, there's a ceremonial bowl of rosewater near the head table, but it's more for show than sanitation. The lower tables? You're lucky if someone wipes their fingers on their pants before grabbing a communal meat pie. Let's take a moment to appreciate the medieval relationship with germs, which is to say they didn't know germs existed. Illness was blamed on bad air, imbalanced humours, or divine punishment. So naturally, there's zero concern about shared goblets, communal bowls, or using the same knife to slice meat, open letters, and occasionally perform emergency dentistry. If you had modern hand sanitizer, you'd be treated like an alchemist or burned as a witch. You're starting to feel a bit woozy. It's not just the mead now. Your stomach's officially begun open revolt. There's a distinct churning, a prelude to something deeply unpleasant. You shift in your seat, trying to find a position that doesn't amplify the sensation. No luck. Your only solace is that no one seems to be paying attention to you anymore. They're too busy watching a dwarf in a sequined tunic juggle flaming sticks while riding a one-wheeled cart pulled by a goose. You're not making that up. You couldn't if you tried. Another plate is placed in front of you. This one looks normal. It's a pie. Golden brown crust, steam rising from the top, smells like something vaguely edible. You go for it. One bite in, and you realise your mistake. The filling is mostly organs, kidneys, liver, maybe heart, possibly from multiple species. It's humble pie, but a lower-class dish sometimes repurposed for noble tables when the man wanted to get creative or pretend to be humble. You're chewing through irony and offal at the same time. Here's the quirky fact of the evening. The phrase eating humble pie actually comes from this dish. Originally called humble pie, made from deer innards and served cold. It wasn't always a punishment, but it wasn't exactly prime cuisine either. And now you're choking it down with a smile because someone next to you just asked if you're enjoying the Lord's generosity. You nod, you lie, you may be dying. There's more music now, louder, faster. Dancers spin through the room trailing ribbons and scarves. Someone starts stomping in rhythm, and the whole room joins in, the wooden floor shakes, the tables rattle. You wonder if this entire structure is up to code. Then remember it's from the 1300s, and building codes are just a future dream. One of the dancers grabs a noble's hand and pulls him into the circle. The noble, laughing, pulls another. Suddenly you're being beckoned. No, thank you. You try to wave them off, but they take your reluctance as bashful playfulness. A hand grips yours, strong, sticky with some kind of sauce, and drags you to your feet. You stumble into the circle, limbs flailing, feet dragging like a baby deer learning to walk. The music surges, people cheer. You try to move with the rhythm, but you've got a belly full of mead, trenchers, organ, pie and eel broth. It's not going to end well. You spin once, twice, and then very nearly collide with the goose-drawn cart. You catch yourself on a barrel. People laugh. Someone offers you another drink. You say no. They ignore you. You drink it. This is your life now. And just when you think the chaos has peaked, the fire eater arrives. Flaming torches, open mouth, sparks flying. He walks the hall's length, trailing smoke like a comet. Your eyes sting. Your skin sweats anew. And then, just as a torch is swallowed whole, a blast of heat and applause fills the air. The crowd goes wild. You collapse back into your seat, exhausted, buzzed, and honestly unsure whether you're still in reality or some kind of sweaty, mead-fueled hallucination. You glance around the table, bones, sauces, crumpled bread plates, half-full goblets, laughter echoing off stone walls. Someone's passed out in the corner. Another guest is loudly arguing with a tapestry. And you're only halfway through the feast and you're slumped in your chair, which is still aggressively uncomfortable and now even less stable, probably warped by the mead that's spilled across it throughout the evening. You shift and it lets out a moan like an old ship hull. Around you, the feast surges on. People are slapping backs, laughing too loudly, arguing in Latin. One nobleman is furiously trying to balance a whole roasted pheasant on his head. Another is writing poetry on a slab of cheese. The noise is overwhelming. Flutes shouting, the occasional roar of a bear handler trying to keep his dancing companion from mauling the musicians. And over it all comes a new sound. Metal on wood. A servant walks by and casually throws a knife onto your table. Not at anyone, just onto the table, blade first. It sticks upright in the wood with a solid thunk. You flinch. No one else reacts. You glance around, half expecting someone to grab it and lunge. But no, this is just part of the ambience. Apparently knives double as utensils, gifts, weapons, and mild conversation starters here. Here's the awkward thing. You didn't bring a knife. In medieval Europe, especially in the earlier centuries, guests brought their own cutlery. It was considered part of your personal dignity, like wearing pants. The wealthy had ornate knives with jewelled handles and personalised engravings. You were lucky to get the merchant to trade you for that stubby kitchen blade you brought as a gift, which ironically is now probably decorating a wall somewhere, while you attempt to eat stewed pigeon with your hands. You try to reach for the communal knife, a large, greasy, vaguely threatening blade resting near a mound of something that might be fish pudding, but the man next to you shoots you a look. It's the kind of look that says, touch it and die. So you retreat and continue to eat by hand like a toddler at a barbecue. It's messy, sticky, and frankly degrading, especially when you reach for a piece of meat and it slithers out of your fingers like a greased otter. And that's when the seating situation begins to collapse, figuratively and literally. You notice the man 2 seats down suddenly fall backwards with a shout. His bench snapped. There's a stunned silence, then laughter, then applause. A servant rushes in, replaces the plank with something only slightly less broken, and the feast barrels on. No one checks if he's okay, he's probably not. But again, this is a medieval feast, and basic workplace safety hasn't been invented yet. Let's take a closer look at the seating chart, or lack thereof. The closer you are to the Lord's dais, the more important you are. You're several tables back near the outer edge of the hall, which means you're expendable. Historically, these placements were determined by wealth, bloodline, and political usefulness. If you were a nobody, you got scraps, sat in the draft, and prayed no one noticed your lowborn cutlery, or lack thereof. But sometimes deliberately placing rivals near each other was a subtle power move. Keep your enemies close, ideally within stabbing distance. That's the real reason feasts were dangerous. They were politically charged arenas with alcohol, sharp objects, and decades of unresolved feuds. Some historians argue that feasts were often where noble plots unravelled or began. Alliances were formed over goblets, and betrayal set in motion between courses. Your seatmate, who just asked your lineage again with increasing suspicion, might be probing to see if you're a threat, or just planning to rob you later. Either way, you're not passing the vibe check. And here comes the next course, carried by a servant who looks both exhausted and emotionally distant. It's a meat pie, again, but this one's different. It's covered in a thick layer of pastry with little holes punched in the top. Steam pours out like it's trying to escape. The servant sets it down with a grunt and moves on, clearly uninterested in your survival. You cautiously cut into it with your borrowed spoon, revealing something green, not vegetable green, more of a sickly, swampy, don't put that in your body green. Everyone else digs in, so you force a bite. It's goose, maybe, or pigeon, definitely some kind of bird. But the green? That's sauce verte, an herb mixture that was considered extremely fancy and probably invented by a chef who lost a bet. You chew slowly, nodding as if you understand why it's delicious. You don't. You just want your stomach to stop making that strange bubbling noise. Here's a niche fact for you. Some medieval pies were actually elaborate stage pieces. There are records of pies that, when cut open, released live birds, frogs, or even musicians. Yes, people used food to jump scare their guests. While yours is thankfully free of living passengers, it's definitely testing your courage. You look around and notice something else. The servants are watching, not just working, but watching, gauging how much you eat, whether you compliment the dishes, how often you reach for wine. Everything is a signal. Feast etiquette wasn't just about manners, it was about survival. One wrong move could be interpreted as disrespect, arrogance, or worse, rebellion. You recall that awkward moment earlier when you refused the sauce. That might have insulted someone's great-great-grandmother. Meanwhile, across the hall, a loud argument erupts between two knights over whether the main course contained real saffron or just something yellow. The shouting escalates. One of them throws his goblet. The other draws his knife, not in a pass-the-butter way, but in a let's-take-this-outside way. The crowd grows quiet, waiting. A jester steps between them, making honking noises and pretending to faint. It works. The knights cool down, the music resumes. Everyone returns to their mutton like this is Tuesday. Now here's a debate that pops up in academic circles. Were these feasts always so chaotic, or are the wildest ones just overrepresented in records because they made the best stories? Some historians suggest many were orderly affairs. Others point to guest accounts full of blood, vomit, and flaming dessert accidents. Tonight, you're leaning toward Team Chaos. The Lord of the Manor finally speaks again, raising his cup and calling for silence. He offers a toast that is half praise, half threat, and definitely includes something about, "May our enemies' wine turn to vinegar." Everyone cheers, you cheer too, and knock your cup over in the process. It rolls off the table, clatters to the floor, and comes to a dramatic stop near a pair of embroidered shoes that clearly belong to someone far more important than you. Slowly, the noble looks down and looks at the goblet, then looks at you. You smile. He does not. This is it, your first real social wound of the evening. You scramble to retrieve the cup, mutter something that might be Latin, and slide back into your seat, hoping the floor swallows you whole. Your seatmate chuckles. "You'll not be invited to his hunting party," he says with a wink. You're not sure whether he's joking. And the worst part? The next course is on its way. Just when you start to think your stomach might stabilise, you hear it. The slow, synchronised clatter of platters being brought in again. It's like a metallic heartbeat echoing down the stone hall. You freeze, mid-wince, as the servants enter, carrying what can only be described as meat architecture. Slabs of roasted animals are stacked into pyramids, towers and bridges. One dish has roast quail skewered and posed mid-flight atop what might be a venison throne. Another platter is topped with a boar's head, grinning with peeled lips, its eyes replaced by shiny black olives, and a crown perched jauntily on its skull. Someone in the back actually applauds. You're not sure if this is dinner or dinner theatre, but either way, you're about to be the unlucky audience. The closest platter to you is piled high with roasted game, duck, rabbit, pigeon, and they all look like they've been through a fire and a taxidermy accident. A servant drops a leg of something onto your wooden plate with a wet thud. It twitches slightly. You stare at it. It stares back. The man beside you digs in with enthusiasm, tearing meat from bone with his teeth and making noises you'd usually associate with lions on wildlife documentaries. This, as you may have gathered, is the meat course, or more accurately, another meat course. By medieval standards, this is still mid-feast, and the goal isn't just to feed people, it's to overwhelm them. Quantity, variety, spectacle. There's a deeply unspoken rule that says if you leave hungry, the host is weak, so the dishes keep coming even if you've already passed the point of digestive failure. And here's a historical tidbit to chew on. The average high-status medieval feast could include over 20 courses. 20, not 20 dishes, 20 courses. That's hundreds of individual plates, many of which required days of preparation and a kitchen staff the size of a small village. And none of it, not a single bite, was refrigerated. The line between roasted delicacy and botulism starter pack was razor thin. Which brings us to the thing currently on your plate. You sniff it cautiously. It's gamey, and not in the elegant, earthy flavours way. It's like someone roasted a muskrat inside a barn and seasoned it with dried regret. You take a tentative bite. It's greasy, chewy, and inexplicably sweet. The sauce is dark and sticky and clings to your molars like medieval caramel. You swallow with effort and chase it with another gulp of mead that now tastes like desperation. The noblewoman across from you raises an eyebrow. "Not to your liking?" she asks, in the same tone someone might use to accuse you of treason. You smile weakly and mumble something about rich flavours. She nods and stabs another chunk of meat with the precision of a surgeon performing a vendetta. Let's throw in a fringe fact while you recover. In some parts of Europe, noblemen actually ate animals that were extinct or considered nearly mythological, either as a flex or because someone in the kitchen made a terrible identification error. One recorded feast included roasted bustards, giant birds so rare they were nearly gone by the 1500s. There's even a disputed story about someone trying to cook a dodo at a banquet. So yes, the thing on your plate could theoretically be something history has since apologised for. Around you, the atmosphere is reaching fever pitch. Cups clink, bones clatter onto the floor. A man stands to recite a poem and immediately falls over. A group of tipsy guests begins to chant something in French that might be a drinking song or possibly a curse. The bear, bless its heart, is snoring loudly in the corner, sprawled across what used to be a wine cask. The air is thick with grease, sweat, and medieval perfume, an aggressive mix of rosewater, cinnamon, and what might be vinegar steeped in cloves. You glance back at the Lord's table. He looks bored, which is dangerous. A bored host can suddenly decide to spice things up, and not with condiments, with contests or insults or impromptu performances. And sure enough, he raises his hand and the music cuts off. A silence ripples through the room like someone dropped a stone into a shallow pond. Everyone looks up. Then, with no announcement, a servant brings out a roast boar. Whole, head still on, mouth stuffed with something that looks suspiciously like a smaller animal. It's mounted on a plank with wheels and pushed down the centre of the room like a parade float. The skin is glossy, lacquered with honey and black pepper, and the smell is overwhelming. Smoky, spicy, undeniably primal. Guests lean in, wide-eyed. This is the centerpiece. Boar's head wasn't just food, it was status. Hunting and roasting a wild boar required wealth, skill, and servants willing to be gored for your supper. Some feasts even had full songs dedicated to the presentation of the boar's head, and tonight you're living that tradition. Except you're also fairly certain the meat you're smelling has been left a bit too long. There's a sour note beneath the spice. The beginnings of something wrong, but no one else seems to care. The Lord carves the first slice himself and passes it to his neighbour. Soon pieces are being distributed like relics. You get a slab of flank. It's tough, it fights your teeth. But you chew anyway, because now everyone is watching again. You can't not eat the centerpiece. That would be like spitting on a national flag, or worse, criticising someone's hunting dog. Then it hits you, not the meat, the realisation. There's no way out. You've passed the point of no return. You can't leave early. You can't decline food. You can't even slip away to the corner for a quick dry heave without being noticed. You're locked into this meat-crazed spectacle until the final course, or until your body just gives up. You glance at the window. It's pitch black outside. The night is still young, and so are the ambitions of everyone trying to climb the social ladder via goose pâté and forced laughter. A debate breaks out at the far table. Someone claims the boar is underdone. Another swears it's perfectly pink, just as the king likes it. The discussion escalates. Words are shouted. Someone pulls out a dried sausage and uses it as a prop in their argument. This apparently is how cuisine and politics intertwine. You pretend to be deeply fascinated by your cup while mentally reviewing your escape options. There are none. And for those wondering, yes, this all tracks with history. Medieval feasts weren't all high elegance and gentle lute music. They were sweaty, chaotic, indulgent marathons of food, power plays, and gastrointestinal high-wire acts. They were about excess, spectacle, and testing the physical limits of everyone in attendance. You, unfortunately, are discovering those limits the hard way. Your goblet is refilled again. You didn't ask. You're not sure who did. The wine this time is darker, heavier, and smells like fruit that's trying to turn into vinegar. You sip it anyway, and chew another bite of the boar that tastes like pine needles and existential dread. And as you sit there, woozy and overstuffed, surrounded by nobles arguing about medieval gravy, you have one very clear, very sobering thought. You're not going to make it to dessert. The pie arrives with no warning, like a final boss battle at the end of a cursed level. It's massive, golden crust rising like a hill in spring, the top stamped with what looks like a family crest or maybe just a warning symbol. A servant places it in the centre of your table with a grunt and steps back as though he's dropped a live animal, which, based on everything you've eaten tonight, is a legitimate concern. Steam curls from a cut in the crust, and the smell hits you, something savoury and slightly metallic, with undertones of old onions and disappointment. Everyone leans in. You know better now than to show hesitation. You pick up your makeshift spoon, your shaky hands not quite hiding the dread, and dig in. The crust is thick, dense, and oddly sweet. Inside, there's a grey-brown mixture that defies identification. You spear a chunk and raise it to your mouth, knowing this is either a turning point or a death sentence. You chew. It's meaty, salty, chewy, but it's the aftertaste that kills you. Something sour, something wrong. You swallow anyway. And then your seatmate leans in with a grin and says, "Ah, you found the humble pie." Of course you have. Humble pie, or umble pie as it was originally spelled, isn't just a clever phrase. It was a very real dish, made from the chopped innards of deer, heart, lungs, liver, and pretty much anything else left after the nobles had taken the prime cuts. Traditionally, it was food for servants and lower-ranking folk. Tonight, however, someone has decided to make it festive. You smile politely and choke down another bite, while pretending it's not actively uncooking everything else in your stomach. Let's pause here for a fun linguistic moment. The phrase eating humble pie comes directly from this dish. Over time, the pronunciation shifted, and the H was added as spelling evolved and people forgot the dish's gruesome roots. Today, the phrase means swallowing your pride. Back then, it meant swallowing actual organs, possibly spoiled, and here you are, doing both. You reach for your goblet and realise it's been replaced. The wine inside is lighter this time, almost pink, and smells aggressively floral, like someone dissolved a bouquet in vinegar. You sip it anyway. At this point, your mouth tastes like battlefield shrapnel, and anything remotely fresh is welcome. The wine bites back, but clears your tongue enough to keep going. Around you, reactions to the humble pie are mixed. The noblewoman across the table picks at it delicately, her expression neutral but unreadable. The man next to you devours it like it's a delicacy. He belches audibly and proclaims, "Nothing like a bit of bowels to settle the stomach." Someone down the table coughs and quietly excuses themselves. You have no idea where they've gone, but you envy them. And then, without warning, the entire hall goes quiet. A procession enters from the far end, another dish, of course, but this one's theatrical. It's being carried by 6 servants and is covered by a massive silver dome, which already has you nervous. As they reach the Lord's dais, a herald steps forward and loudly declares, "Behold, the pie of wonders." Then, with great ceremony, the dome is lifted. A flock of small birds flies out. Actual birds. They flap into the rafters in a squawking cloud of wings and feathers, and the crowd erupts into laughter and cheers. A few guests duck. Someone drops a goblet. You just sit there blinking, wondering if the mead has finally pushed you into hallucination territory. But no, this is real. The pie had birds in it, live ones. Apparently, this is a form of entertainment. And yes, historically, this was a thing. Medieval cooks, especially those working for the very rich or very bored, occasionally stuffed live animals into pastry shells. Birds, frogs, even squirrels. When the crust was cut open, they'd fly or hop out to the delight or horror of the guests. The birds were sometimes removed and released mid-baking, but not always. It's unclear how many pies were actual performances and how many were awkward accidents involving traumatized animals and half-cooked feathers. The pie of wonders is replaced with a real meat pie. Normal this time, thank the heavens, but no one seems all that hungry anymore. You pick at your plate, careful not to dig too deep. Who knows what's hiding inside? You try to blend in again, chewing mechanically while the hall slowly returns to its previous roar. You're starting to feel the consequences of your decisions. Your belly is a cauldron of conflicting ingredients. Wine, mead, eel, humble pie, suspect bird, at least one kind of organ meat, and a spoonful of mint sauce you thought was jelly. Your forehead is damp. Your hands tremble slightly as you lift your goblet. You can hear your heartbeat in your ears. At the next table over, a guest leans forward and lets out an unrestrained groan before laying his head on the totes. No one reacts. He's clearly just taking a break. It's accepted, maybe even expected. You glance around. Several people are now slumped in their seats, heads nodding, hands slack. The feast has turned into an endurance test, and the casualties are starting to mount. You try to focus. You try to think. But the torches on the wall flicker harder, and the shadows seem to dance more than they did an hour ago. The music sounds slightly warped. The lute player in the corner is either extremely talented or actively battling some inner demon via chord progression. And you've reached the point where standing feels like a strategic error. A servant passes by with a tray of delicate finger food, minced meat wrapped in dough sprinkled with spices. They look innocent, deceptive even. You reach for one just as someone slaps your hand. "Not for us," your neighbour says with a smirk. "Those go to the higher tables." Right. More class structure. Even within this soaked marathon, the social divide is sharp. The rich get the first pick of food, the better drink, the hotter dishes, and now, apparently, the tiny meat parcels that don't smell like regret. You withdraw your hand and nod. You're learning. Slowly, painfully. Let's add a quick scholarly debate. Was humble pie actually served at noble feasts, or is that just poetic symbolism we've inflated over time? Some historians argue that offal pies were reserved for servants and lower tables, while others insist they were occasionally showcased during big banquets as a nod to sharing the wealth. Either way, tonight you've learned firsthand that humility is not just a virtue, it's a choking hazard. You sit back again, your chair creaking ominously under your weight, your gut heavy with mystery meats and your tongue numb from wine of indeterminate origin. You're lightheaded, possibly feverish, and a little scared. And through the heat and the noise, you hear someone whisper behind you, "Dessert is next." A chill runs down your spine. You're not sure how many hours have passed. Could be 2, could be 10. Time at a medieval feast has no meaning. It's measured not in minutes or hours, but in courses and the slow unravelling of your internal organs. Your stomach has become a boiling cauldron of fermented honey, half-digested game bird, and something that definitely wasn't pudding but claimed to be. And now, as if summoned by your mounting dread, dessert is here, but it doesn't come in like a delicate sorbet or a dainty plate of sliced fruit. No, dessert at a medieval feast arrives the way everything else does, loudly, extravagantly, and with the clear intent to maim or amaze. The first thing you see is a massive structure being wheeled into the hall. It's unclear if it's a pastry or a weapon of war. It's tall, covered in sponge sugar that crackles in the torchlight like glass, and decorated with candied violets and what look like entire roasted dates impaled on wooden skewers. The guests cheer, some bang on the tables, one man cries. A servant steps forward and begins slicing into the sugar behemoth with a small axe. That's not a joke. An axe. The shards fall away like stained glass, revealing an inner layer of dense cake, dried fruits, and something vaguely jelly-like that squelches ominously as it lands on the plate. A chunk is handed to you. You stare at it like it's a cursed artifact, and frankly, it might be. Here's your first bite of medieval dessert. It's heavy, soaked in something alcoholic. The texture is part cake, part bread, and part congealed dream. It tastes like raisins, wine, and regret. You chew slowly, and then you chew again, because it doesn't break down, it just lingers. Here's a fun historical fact. Medieval desserts weren't sweet the way we think of them today. Sugar was a rare and extensive import, more medicine than food, so desserts were often flavoured with honey, dried fruit, wine reductions, or bizarre spice blends that would make a modern pastry chef cry. Cakes were more like dense loaves, and custards were sometimes savoury. And don't even get started on how many times someone thought saffron belonged in literally everything. You try another bite of your dessert brick, mostly because everyone else is watching. You're beginning to realise that survival here isn't just physical, it's theatrical. Every motion is being judged. Every bite you take signals loyalty, status, or just whether your stomach is still functioning. You nod, make a polite noise that might be and nearly choke on a clove the size of a walnut. And then it gets worse, because someone has set a bowl of spiced milk curds in front of you. That's not a dessert, that's an accident. It jiggles in an aggressive way and smells like it's gone through a 3-day spiritual awakening. You try a spoonful, it's sour, slimy, and aggressively nutmeg forward. The nobleman next to you gives a nod of approval, clearly thinking you've developed a taste for this. You nod back while quietly dying inside. Let's throw in a bizarre culinary gem here. One dessert that showed up in banquet records is called leche lombard, a kind of sweet meat jelly made with almond milk and pork fat, thickened and shaped into decorative moulds. It was the pinnacle of luxury. You pray you're not eating that. But honestly, you might be. There's a faint meaty undertone to this pudding, see, and that should never be true of dessert. Meanwhile, a server is parading through the hall with candied nuts, dates stuffed with cheese, and fruit suspended in what looks like hardened syrup. None of it seems remotely edible. The fruit looks mummified, the cheese is sweating. A man behind you crunches into something with such force you're half convinced he cracked a tooth. Then comes the sugar sculpture. Literally. A tower made of moulded sugar paste shaped into a castle with battlements and tiny edible knights. It's wheeled in as a centerpiece, not meant for consumption but admiration, except that doesn't stop someone from breaking off a turret and popping it into their mouth. They chew, their jaw locks slightly, they smile through the pain. You're offered a slice of something that claims to be a tart. You accept. The crust is dense. The filling is made of eggs, almond paste, and what might be pear. But it's been so thoroughly spiced and cooked down that it tastes more like waxy cinnamon cement. You chew and chew and chew. Your molars are beginning to stage a quiet protest. By now, the sugar has hit your bloodstream like a punch. Your head swims. Your stomach makes a sound like a cauldron tipping over. A wave of warmth crashes over you, and for a terrifying second you're convinced you're going to pass out, not from drunkenness, but from dessert. And here's a scholarly debate to distract you. Were these desserts truly enjoyed by everyone, or were they mostly for show? Some argue the fancier dishes were rarely eaten, just admired and then discarded. Others claim they were devoured with the same abandon as the meat and wine. Looking around this hall, where a noble is gnawing on a hardened fruit cluster like a raccoon, with a prize, you lean toward the latter. Appetite here knows no limits, or boundaries, or mercy. You slump in your chair again, letting the sugar fog wash over you. Your eyes flutter shut for a moment, and you dream briefly of ice cream and refrigerators and food labels. Then you snap back into reality as someone drops an entire bowl of fig custard in your lap. It's warm, it's wet, it's sticky, and it smells like it's been alive at least once. No one apologizes. You just nod. Because in the hierarchy of feast disasters, being doused in custard is minor. You're still alive, still seated, still not actively vomiting, which, based on the sounds you're hearing from the far side of the hall, puts you ahead of at least 3 other guests. And then, of course, they serve more mead. Your goblet is refilled by a servant who looks like she's trying not to laugh. You stare at the golden liquid, swirling thickly in your cup. It smells sweeter now. You're pretty sure this one is spiced with something you can't name. Cardamom, clove, maybe pine needles and regret. You sip, you grimace, you drink it anyway because dessert demands a nightcap, or possibly a sedative. You look around, the sugar sculpture has collapsed. Someone's wearing part of it as a hat. A noblewoman is smearing fruit paste on her arms, possibly as skincare. The musicians are slurring their way through a tune that sounds like 3 different songs fighting to the death, and you're still in it. You have no idea how. You're glazed in custard, bloated with medieval spice cake, and vaguely vibrating from a combination of clove overdose and panic. But you're vertical. You're breathing. And technically dessert is over. That should feel like a win, but in the medieval world the end of dessert doesn't mean the end of the feast. It just means you've entered the second phase. You sit there, slowly fusing to your bench, soaked in custard, bloated beyond all logic, and somehow still clutching a goblet of mead that refills itself every time you blink. You'd think dessert would mark the finish line, the celebratory descent into food coma, maybe even a polite exit. But no, in the medieval feast, the end of dessert is less like closing credits and more like an intermission between acts. Because now comes the part where the evening slides fully off the rails. It begins innocently enough. Music, louder than before, rhythmic, a thudding beat under a flurry of flutes and lutes, punctuated by something that sounds suspiciously like a goat hoof tapping against a tambourine. People begin to rise from their seats, slowly at first, groaning like reanimated corpses, holding their bellies, stretching out their limbs, and then they begin to dance. You try to stay seated, but someone grabs your arm. Someone larger, drunker, and far more enthusiastic than you'll ever be about medieval interpretive dance. You're hauled upright and pulled into the fray. The centre of the hall becomes a spinning, stomping blur of bodies in every state of digestion. There's no coordination, no rhythm. It's part line dance, part seizure, and part exorcism. Your legs move, sort of. You hop once, spin, trip, recover, spin again. A woman in a velvet dress twirls dangerously close to your face, come out. A man in a chainmail vest shouts something in Middle English and nearly takes your nose off with an elbow. Someone hurls a tankard through the air like a discus. It lands with a splash near the hearth, sending a dog skittering across the floor. And through it all, the musicians play like their lives depend on it, which historically they might. Here's a real historical tidbit. Some post-feast dancing descended into what scholars call carol or farandole, basically chaotic group dances that had no clear beginning or end. They could last hours, and no one entirely understood the rules, which makes sense considering most participants were blackout drunk and dressed in 40 pounds of wool and embroidery. The line between dancing and public flailing was thin, very thin. You try to keep up, but your stomach is actively staging a rebellion. Every step sends shockwaves through your gut like you're walking with a bowl of gelatin inside you. You wobble, you slow, you stop. Your dance partner shrugs and whirls away, grabbing a jester by the ankle and spinning him in circles like a sack of flour. You stagger back to your bench, collapse into it, and realise your legs are shaking uncontrollably. That's when you notice the smell. It's faint at first, foul, sharp, a creeping, nose-curling aroma that seems to drift in from under the tables. You peer around and realise the answer is under your feet. Literally. Bones, grease-soaked cloth, crushed fruit, pieces of bread used as makeshift napkins, and at least one eviscerated eel. This hall is a biohazard. The floor is an oozing swamp of feast debris. You lift your foot and a piece of something clings to it. You don't investigate. Let's talk hygiene, or lack thereof. One of the biggest modern myths is that medieval people were universally filthy. Not entirely true. In noble courts, they at least tried. Basins of scented water were sometimes provided for hand washing between courses. Herbs and flowers were scattered across the floors to cover stench. And yet the reality was still grim. Ventilation? Non-existent. Waste disposal? Questionable. Sanitation regulations? Laughable. You now understand why so many diseases had names that sound like haunted inns. Across the table, someone leans over and starts aggressively dabbing at their armpits with a wedge of cheesecloth. Another person uses a chicken leg to scratch their back. And someone else, no exaggeration, is vomiting into a pewter goblet while still tapping their foot to the music. No one reacts. You, however, are losing the fight against your gag reflex. You look toward the high table and see the Lord reclined like some Roman emperor, watching the room with the amused detachment of a man who knows he won't have to help clean any of this up. A servant whispers something in his ear. He nods. Suddenly a bell rings. The music stops. Everyone freezes. The Lord stands, raises his cup, and declares something that sounds celebratory but slurred. Whatever it is, it cues a new round of drink, and possibly trouble, because now the strong stuff comes out. Servants begin making rounds with the new vessels, long-necked bottles, oddly shaped jugs, flasks stoppered with wax. The air takes on a sweet, pungent scent. You're handed a clay cup filled with a deep red liquid. You sniff it. It smells like herbs and wine and maybe something medicinal. Or poisonous, or both. Your neighbour raises his cup and clinks yours. Hypocras, he says, smiling like a man who's seen some things. Ah yes, hypocras. A spiced wine made by infusing red wine with sugar, cinnamon, ginger, and other warming spices. It was believed to aid digestion, stimulate the body, and counteract the sins of gluttony. In reality, it's medieval mulled wine with a vengeance. You take a sip. It's strong, syrupy, and makes your throat burn pleasantly. For a brief moment you feel better, stronger, maybe even immortal. That's the dangerous part. Because now the room starts to tilt. Not literally, but in your perception. The walls seem closer, the torches brighter. The music picks back up, even more frantic than before. A man shouts, "To the bones!" and everyone begins throwing chicken carcasses at nearby tapestry. Someone lights something on fire. The jester is juggling apples and knives. You're sweating through your tunic and blinking rapidly, trying to keep up. This is the post-dessert frenzy, the ancient custom of partying past the point of pleasure. It's no longer about the food or the drinks, it's about the spectacle. The court's social tension has melted into chaos. Alliances are forming over shared desserts, grudges resurfacing from spilled gravy. One knight slams his goblet down and accuses another of cheating during last year's archery tournament. A duel might be coming, and you're sitting in the splash zone. Let's throw in a fringe historical rumour. Some feasts supposedly ended with mock battles, complete with foam weapons or pig bladder maces. Whether that actually happened or was just chroniclers having fun with metaphor is unclear, but judging by the man currently fencing with a leg of lamb, there's at least some precedent. You lean back, dizzy, your tunic damp, your boots soaked through, your stomach audibly sloshing. You've survived roasted peacock, fire-breathing entertainers, meat pies stuffed with secrets, and a clove the size of a chestnut. And now, as the feast barrels past all sanity, you realise something chilling. This could still go on for hours. The feast has entered what can only be described as its feral stage. The rules, if there were ever any to begin with, have fully evaporated into a mead-scented mist. The hall no longer feels like a place where food is served. It feels like a battlefield, a tavern, and a madhouse stitched together with greasy linen and poultry bones. You, still upright somehow, are clinging to the last fragments of your dignity, while the people around you devolve into a carnival of aristocratic chaos. A plate sails across the room. You don't even flinch anymore. It misses the jester, who is now inexplicably wearing half a roasted duck on his head and pelting apple cores into an open window. One of the noblewomen is standing on a bench, reciting what might be poetry or an old family curse while holding a candle in each hand. The wax drips steadily onto her hair. No one tries to stop her, and then someone sneezes. It's not just a little achoo, it's a sonic boom. A full-bodied, face-forward explosion from a rotund knight, seated 2 tables away. His sneeze sends a visible spray across the table, coating a bowl of nuts and at least one unfortunate servant. There is no apology. He sniffs, wipes his nose on his sleeve. Your sleeve, actually, as he turns, and keeps eating. You make a small choking sound and shift away, but the damage is done. You're wearing sneeze sauce. Let's take a moment to talk about hygiene, or, more accurately, the painful absence of it. The medieval feast was not exactly known for its sparkling sanitary conditions. While it's true that some nobles did have access to basins of scented water or linen towels for cleaning their hands, those were more decorative than useful. Most people ate with their fingers, shared cups dipped into communal bowls, and wiped their hands on the table, their clothes, or, if you were particularly unlucky, the nearest guest. That's you, by the way. You are the human napkin. The table in front of you is a horror show. Bones, soggy bread trenchers, congealed sauces, and the remains of something gelatinous that no one touched and no one dared remove. A spoon lies submerged in a gravy lake. Someone dropped a whole quail earlier, and now it's just resting on the floor under your bench, staring up at you with one blackened eye like it's plotting revenge. You've also come to terms with the scent of the room. It's not just food, it's people, particularly people who haven't bathed since the start of Lent, covered in sweat, perfume, wine, bearl, fur, and the ghosts of eels past. The lords and ladies wear heavy clothing, velvet, wool, fur, all great for trapping body heat and worse for trapping body odour. You're no better. You smell like panic, mead, and humble pie. Even your fingernails feel greasy. Your tongue is coated in something that won't go away. You tried scraping it with a bread crust earlier, but it just made things worse. One of the musicians walks by, playing a single string on his lute with a drumstick. His expression is vacant. He's no longer playing for money or applause. He's playing because he must, because if he stops, the feast might collapse in on itself like a flan in a cupboard. You raise your cup to him. He nods solemnly and keeps walking, his tune warbling like the last call of a dying bird. You reach for your goblet, again. You don't even know what's in it anymore. Mead, wine, ale. It's changed colour at least twice. You sip it anyway, because your body is thirsty and confused, and you can't tell if you're hot from fever or simply baking in your own fear. The drink burns a little going down. That might be a good sign or a very, very bad one. At the next table over, a debate erupts. The topic, which sauce best complements swan, escalates quickly. A man in a doublet covered in silver thread insists it's almond cream. A woman with hair like a weapon declares it must be cinnamon and cloves. Someone slams a chicken bone on the table to demand silence. You expect an intellectual discussion. Instead, the silver thread man throws a handful of cherries at the cinnamon camp, and they retaliate by overturning a bowl of stewed plums into his lap. It's messy, it's sticky, it smells fantastic. Here's a curious fact. In the medieval mindset, sauces weren't just condiments, they were status. The more ingredients, the more exotic the spices, the higher your rank. A lord might boast of a sauce containing ginger, cinnamon, saffron and sugar, ingredients imported from the farthest reaches of the known world. Serving them showed power. Understanding how to use them showed refinement. Failing to appreciate them, that could get you labelled as uncultured, or worse, French. You meanwhile have no opinions about sauces. You're too busy trying not to throw up into your goblet. Your stomach has reached a critical state. It's like a medieval stew cauldron, full, bubbling and threatening to erupt at any moment. Every burp feels like it might be the beginning of something catastrophic. And then someone slaps your back, hard. You lurch forward, your face nearly landing in a bowl of what might be spiced lentils. "Still breathing, friend?" a voice slurs in your ear. You turn to see a man with a nose like a twisted carrot and a double chin that jiggles with every laugh. He shoves a tankard into your hand. "Try this, strongest in the county, made from plums and madness." You raise it to your lips. You're too tired to argue. The first sip sends a jolt through your whole body. It's sour, pungent, and tastes vaguely of candle wax and burnt apricot. Your eyes water, your mouth puckers, your tongue tries to escape your skull. "Good, yes?" he asks. You nod weakly. He howls with delight and stumbles away. You're not okay. Let's get into one more scholarly debate. Were feasts this unhinged across the board, or is this just what happened in the most decadent courts? Some historians suggest the wilder examples were outliers, records exaggerated by chroniclers or playwrights, but others point to consistent themes of indulgence, intoxication, and general culinary lawlessness. Judging by the nobleman now attempting to juggle goblets with one hand and slap his servant with the other, this place is leaning full disaster mode. And through it all, you endure. Grease-slicked, sweat-soaked, spiritually compromised. You're running on instinct now, fight, flight, or burp. That's where you're at. Your body is tired. Your brain is soup. The back of your throat tastes like cloves and guilt. You want to lie down, but your bench wobbles when you breathe too hard. Someone starts singing again. The jester has lost most of his bells. The bear handler is asleep. You glance down at your lap and realise a fig has somehow rolled there and begun to dissolve from heat and shame. And still, they bring more food. You're at the point where your soul might evacuate your body just to escape what's happening to your digestive system. You've lost track of time, courses, and whether your tunic has always been this colour, or if it's now just permanently stained by medieval food crime. Your back aches, your knees click when you move, and there's something sticky in your hair that smells faintly of overripe pears and suffering. But none of that compares to what's happening at your table now, which has become a free-for-all of cutlery confusion and truly unsettling hygiene. You reach for what you hope is a clean spoon, and find only options that look like they've been used to dig a small trench. Someone down the table is using 2 knives to eat, a move that screams both confidence and low regard for their gums. Another guest, clearly well into their 6th cup of something flammable, is sipping stew straight from the bowl like a cat. Across the way, a woman in rich furs casually licks gravy from her fingers before grabbing a communal bread loaf. You shudder. You may never eat again. Let's talk about the medieval relationship with cutlery, or lack thereof. Forks, as you probably know, were still suspicious in much of Europe for centuries. They were considered decadent, effeminate, or just plain unnecessary. Real eaters, manly eaters, used knives in their hands. In some circles, the fork was even associated with the devil. Because what else has 2 prongs and helps people sin by enjoying their food too much? So you're left trying to eat a slippery poached pear with a dull spoon that someone else used earlier for gravy. You try your fingers, but the pear explodes like a soft water balloon, spraying your lap and your neighbour, who thankfully doesn't notice because he's busy wrestling a roast duck leg into his mouth like it's the last thing he'll ever do. You wipe your hands on what's left of your dignity and stare into the distance. The tablecloth, if you can even call it that anymore, looks like a crime scene. Wine rings, burn marks, scattered bones. A goblet has tipped over and soaked one entire corner in something pink and syrupy, which has glued several bits of bread to the surface like some kind of culinary collage. At the far end, someone is piling chicken skins into a little pyramid and trying to light it on fire with a torch. A servant walks by, looks at it, and keeps walking. You turn your attention to your own little circle of chaos. The table is crowded, elbow to elbow. Everyone's arms are greasy, everyone's voice is too loud. You try to protect your limited personal space, but it's impossible. Someone sneezes again, this time without even pretending to cover it. A chunk of pheasant dislodges from his mouth and lands near your cup. You make eye contact with it for too long. It might haunt your dreams. Here's a grim but relevant historical truth. The concept of personal hygiene at the table was deeply different from ours. Sure, guests were often provided with damp cloths or finger bowls, but what those bowls did not contain was antibacterial soap or any reliable concept of sanitation. Most people wiped their mouths with the back of their hands, their sleeves, or the tablecloth, sometimes mid-conversation. If someone had to pick their teeth, they did it openly, with a knife, or, if they were classy, a personal toothpick made of bone or silver. You saw one noble earlier flossing with a feather. Your hands are now so slick you could probably win a wrestling match with an eel. Your spoon is missing, either stolen or stuck to the underside of someone's bread trencher. You glance down and realise your sleeves are completely soaked through with a combination of broth, syrup, and something unidentifiable but faintly green. You're pretty sure if you squeezed them, you could flavour an entire cauldron of stew. A new plate is dropped in front of you. Something soft, white, and vaguely cheesy. You poke it. It wobbles. It smells sweet and sour at the same time, like someone tried to make a dessert out of old socks. You decide to skip it. Your stomach thanks you. Next to you, two guests begin arguing about who brought the better knife. One claims his blade was forged in Damascus. The other insists his was blessed by a monk. They both look like they were made in the same filthy forge behind the local tavern. The lord at the high table, sensing the rising tension, signals to the musicians to play louder. They oblige, launching into a frantic tune that sounds like a chicken chase set to a war march. The sound doesn't help, it only adds to the madness. Now you're being asked to share a plate with someone you've never met, who is openly chewing with his mouth wide open. Bits of duck fly every time he speaks. You lean away. He leans closer. He's telling a story about how he once saw a bear wrestle a monk over a piece of bread. You want to ask follow-up questions, but you're too busy trying to dodge his splatter radius. And here's your quirky historical side note. In many parts of medieval Europe, sharing food and cutlery wasn't just common, it was encouraged. Sharing signified fellowship, brotherhood, even diplomacy. In some feasts, two guests would be assigned a single cup to pass between them, or a bowl to eat from in turns. In theory, it was charming. In practice, it was a fast track to disease, awkwardness, and intense sensory trauma. You can't handle it anymore. You stand up, wobble actually, and try to leave the table. You just want to wash your hands, or dip them in sand, or bury them in snow. But before you can take 2 steps, a servant appears and sets down another bowl in your place. It's water, lukewarm, floating with flower petals, a wash bowl, a solution. You plunge your hands in, it helps, for about 4 seconds. Then you realise someone else used it before you. There's a small chunk of meat bobbing near your wrist, and a strand of hair stuck to the rim. You remove your hands slowly, like a child touching something dead, and dry them on your already ruined tunic. Across the room, someone is laughing so hard they fall backward off their bench. A servant rushes over, not to help, but to retrieve the fallen goblet before it rolls under the dais. The man lies on the floor, giggling, covered in pudding. Another day in paradise. You return to your seat because there's nowhere else to go. You're back in the thick of it, sticky, dazed and cutleryless. Someone passes you a knife and you take it automatically, even though it looks like it was last used to carve a saddle. You clutch it, like a talisman. You're not eating anymore. You're surviving, one bite at a time, one spill at a time, one deeply unhygienic moment at a time. You sit there gripping your communal knife like it's a lifeline, the wooden handle slick with something you hope is only gravy. The world around you has officially surrendered to madness. The table's become a war zone of smeared sauces and drunken declarations, and your fellow guests now resemble the aftermath of a battlefield more than a dinner party. There's a man sleeping face down in a puddle of stewed prunes 2 seats away, and his snores harmonise eerily with the bagpipes wailing from the corner. No one seems bothered, least of all the man beside you, who is trying to butter a slice of roast lamb with his thumb. You stare at your own plate, now crusted with remnants of courses long past. Bits of fish, boiled grains, unidentifiable roots. There's a glob of something gelatinous you never consented to and don't remember being served. You poke it with the knife. It shivers. You shove the plate slightly farther away just in case. Let's take a moment to reflect on a truth that's becoming painfully clear. Eating in medieval times wasn't just about food. It was about theatre, hierarchy, survival instincts, and the gentle art of pretending you weren't slowly being poisoned by your own curiosity. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the cutlery situation. Here you are, still trying to slice something mushy with a blade better suited for swordplay. Meanwhile, across the table, a well-dressed noble is using his knife as a pointer, while he lectures a woman about the proper angle to carve a goose leg. In this world, a knife isn't just a utensil, it's a personal emblem. Sharp, ornate, and frequently used to remind the table that you're important enough to own something that can both slice a pear and make a political statement. Some of these knives are downright terrifying, longer than your forearm, engraved with prayers or family mottos, gleaming like they've been polished with stolen sunlight. And you, of course, are holding a rusted hunk of metal that would be declined by a pawn-shop rat. You try to eat a piece of cold duck. The skin has gone rubbery. The fat coats your tongue. You swallow with effort and immediately regret it. You reach for your goblet, now filled with something new, something dark, sour, and suspiciously smoky. It tastes like burnt plums and anxiety. You drink it anyway. It's either that or choke on duck gristle. At the high table, the host lets out a deep theatrical sigh. He stands again, goblet raised in what's probably his 7th toast of the evening. This one, judging by the tone, is about loyalty, or boar hunting, or maybe it's just a dramatic reading of his shopping list. Either way, everyone raises their cups and cheers, and the sound echoes like a wave crashing through the hall. You raise yours too, out of fear and habit. Then, with zero warning, a man across the table slams his goblet down and declares, "I once saw a Rousseau heron served in full flight." The hall quiets. He grins, missing a few key teeth, and spreads his arms to demonstrate. Another noble scoffs and counters with a claim about a fish so long it had to be coiled around a table 3 times before being served. People nod. Someone mentions a flying pie. Everyone agrees that was a good one. It becomes clear that you've stumbled into the boasting hour, an unspoken post-meal tradition where nobles compete to outdo each other with tales of extravagant dishes, legendary feasts, and wildly implausible meals that may or may not have actually happened. Some scholars believe these boasts were a form of social jousting, subtle ways to assert wealth, taste, and connections. Others think it was just what happened when you gave rich people too much wine and not enough structured conversation. You are now being asked to share your most impressive feast story. You blink. Everyone is looking at you. This is it. Your moment. You could lie. You should lie. But you're too drunk, too tired, and your stomach feels like it's trying to tie itself into a bow, so you mutter something about a Thanksgiving turkey with marshmallows on sweet potatoes. Silence. A few confused looks. One noble leans forward and says, "What's a marshmallow?" You shrug. "It's soft, sweet, burns well." A few murmurs. One man says, "Witchcraft." Another nods sagely and says, "We used to have something like that. Turned out to be lard and sheep's teeth." They accept your story, mostly because no one has the energy to press you further. You return to your meal, or what's left of it, and try not to look at the communal salt bowl, which now contains at least 2 fingernails and what appears to be a beetle doing its best to escape. You decide you no longer need seasoning in your life. Next to you, a small commotion breaks out. Someone's knife is missing. Accusations fly. One man points at another. Voices rise, the table rattles. Knives, you see, are serious business. They're often family heirlooms, gifts of honour, or symbols of allegiance. Losing one, or being accused of stealing one, is like accusing someone of treason. You instinctively check your belt, even though your knife is so worthless no one would take it unless they mistook it for a chewing toy. A servant approaches the table, holding the missing knife like it's a cursed relic. Turns out it slid off the table and lodged in a loaf of bread. Everyone laughs, slightly too loudly. The tension breaks, but you now understand how easily things can go sideways. This isn't just a dinner. This is a high-stakes performance of trust, status, and weaponized etiquette. And here's your scholarly debate for the night. Did medieval guests really walk around with their own knives at all times? Or was this more of a late-period affectation? Some historians argue that by the 14th century, most people brought a personal knife for every occasion, including meals. Others suggest the wealthier guests had access to shared utensils provided by the host. Based on your current table, where a man is now polishing his blade with a chicken thigh, the personal knife theory is winning. You lean back in your seat, if it can even be called that anymore. It creaks ominously. Your stomach shifts again. You realise the bench beneath you is tilting slightly, as if one of the legs has given up and is preparing to resign. You decide to remain perfectly still. Another plate is placed before you, something white, creamy, and cold. Possibly cheese, possibly spoiled custard. You don't touch it. You're past that point now. You are officially full of food, full of regret, full of sounds that should never be coming from your abdomen. The noise around you continues. Laughter, boasts, slurred songs. A nobleman challenges another to a poetry duel. Someone howls at the bear. Someone else falls under the table and does not return. It's getting late, but the feast isn't over. Not even close. Your body is beginning to betray you in subtle but unmistakable ways. Your fingers feel numb. Your jaw aches from excessive, often unnecessary chewing, and your stomach, well, your stomach gave up hours ago. It's not so much digesting as it is brewing. Brewing something ancient, alchemical, and potentially explosive. You've reached that dangerous threshold where you no longer trust a burp. Every small shift of your torso is calculated, strategic, cautious, and yet they've just set another dish in front of you. You stare at it. It stares back. It's meat. Obviously. At least you think it's meat. It has the general shape of something that once had legs, but it's been cooked to a consistency somewhere between leather and pudding. There's a thin glaze over it that catches the torchlight in a way that makes you uncomfortable. And it's garnished with what appear to be candied walnuts and flowers. You poke it with your knife. It gives a little shudder. A puff of steam escapes and smells faintly of clove and fish. That's your first warning. You glance around, hoping for guidance. The nobleman beside you is already halfway through his portion, tearing into it like a man who's discovered his second wind. Another guest stabs a piece with a dagger, sniffs it and shouts, "Swan, I wager," to no one in particular. The woman across the table rolls her eyes and mutters, "It's probably hedgehog again." That gets your attention. Now, a quick historical detour. Yes, hedgehog was eaten in medieval Europe. In fact, almost anything that moved was fair game at one point or another. Medieval cookbooks are riddled with recipes for animals we'd today call adorable or endangered. Badgers, beavers, puffins, porpoises, anything that could be caught, cooked and turned into a social power move was fair game. And swan? Oh, swan was prime luxury. Reserved for nobles, expensive to prepare, and often dressed in its own feathers after roasting to impress guests with the illusion that it had simply died mid-strut. You are now acutely aware that you might be about to eat a species that no longer exists. You cut into the meat and find a texture that defies language. Fibrous and soggy, like something pulled from the bottom of a pond and dried with a whisper. You chew, it's earthy, gamey, a little sour. Definitely not chicken. Could be swan, could also be peacock, or a hallucination. You swallow slowly and decide not to follow up with questions. The problem isn't just what you're eating, it's how much of it. This is course, 11, 15? Who knows? You've stopped counting. You lost count somewhere between the sugared fish pies and the flaming custard that no one remembers ordering. You feel like a snake that swallowed a goat. Every breath is a gamble. Every mouthful is a negotiation between your will to fit in and your body's increasing interest in throwing you overboard. To your left, a servant walks by carrying a tray of what looks like meatballs. He offers you one. You shake your head. He shrugs and moves on. You watch as a guest dips theirs into a green sauce and bites it clean in half. "Definitely dormouse," he says cheerfully. You nod, then immediately regret even being part of the conversation. Here's a quirky historical note. Stuffed dormice were at one point considered delicacies, especially among the Romans, but the tradition lingered in certain parts of Europe well into the medieval period. The recipe often involved stuffing them with nuts, herbs and spices, then roasting or boiling them whole. Sometimes they were even served inside their own little cages for extra flair. because nothing says opulence like presenting your guests with a cooked rodent in a silver terrarium. Back at your table, someone has begun passing around a roasted foot. You don't ask whose. It's been lacquered and decorated with parsley, as if that softens the horror. A young squire gnaws on it with wild-eyed enthusiasm. You turn your head just in time to see your own bench shift again beneath you. That's when you realise something new and terrible. There's a rumbling. Not just inside you, though that is very real and deeply concerning, but around the table. People are groaning, standing, wobbling. A few are swaying like drunks on the deck of a ship during a storm. You catch snippets of whispered complaints. That goose was raw. The fish had bones. My pie moved. A man stands and then immediately sits back down with alarming speed. Another walks in a straight line until he collides with a tapestry and slides to the floor. No one helps him. No one has the strength. Even the musicians are playing slower now, their songs meandering in minor key, like a dirge for dignity. The air smells different too, thicker, more humid. It's part torch smoke, part meat grease, part humanity in full collapse. Someone opens a window. A breeze wafts in and reveals just how stale and heavy the room has become. It's the kind of atmosphere where mushrooms could start growing on bread and no one would notice for a few hours. You shift again and feel your stomach rebel, not violently, not yet, but with a deep ancestral warning, like a wolf growling in the dark before the charge. You clutch your cup with trembling hands and take another sip of what you no longer know. The taste is faintly medicinal, which might be a good thing, or might mean someone started dosing the wine with bitters to stop people from falling over. Across from you, a scholar type is mumbling about humours. Too much black bile, he says, too much heat. This is why we must bleed the meat before serving. He's ignored. He keeps talking. Eventually, he falls asleep mid-sentence with his face in a bowl of gravy. This right here is the tipping point. The moment a medieval feast reveals its final form, not elegance, not grandeur, but culinary Russian roulette. You might make it through the night with only a case of indigestion, or you might be remembered as the guest who exploded after the stewed hare. Nobody knows. That's the fun. And here's the academic divide. Some argue that food safety at these feasts was better than we assume, that experienced cooks knew how to detect spoilage, that spice wasn't used to cover rot but to impress. Others say no. It was a miracle anyone survived the meat course, let alone the third helping of pigeon jelly. Your vote? Firmly in the miracle category. A plate of sausages arrives. You don't look at it. You simply whisper no under your breath and hope the feast gods spare you this round. A merciful servant sees your expression and moves on without a word. You lean back, exhausted. Your face is pale. Your body is bloated and buzzing. Your chair creaks. You stare into the fire and ask yourself a question no one wants to ask at a banquet. What animal did I just eat? At this point, food is no longer your enemy. It's your captor. You're not dining anymore. You're being held hostage by a series of increasingly questionable dishes, and the collective social agreement that no one is allowed to leave until they have had a second helping of something that might be elk tongue soaked in rosewater. Your stomach isn't even trying to digest anymore. It's just storing things in a confused heap while sending urgent messages to your brain like, "Are we under siege? And please stop, we're full of regret and organ meats." And now comes dessert again. Not dessert like earlier, when things were flambéed and covered in hardened sugar armour. This is the weird medieval version of a nightcap, puddings, jellies, and thick custards that seem to appear uninvited at your table, plopped down with a wet thud by servants who have long since abandoned eye contact. One of them drops a pewter dish in front of you. It jiggles ominously. The smell is sweet at first, then not sweet at all, something like boiled milk left in the sun. You stare at the lump. It might be custard, might be a meat jelly, might be a bet. A nobleman nearby leans in with a drunken grin and says, "Try it, the cook says it new." The phrase "it's new" should never apply to something this colourless and wobbling. But you smile because you don't want to offend the cook or the man whose tunic is held together with gold thread and possibly rage. You scoop a bit with your spoon, it barely holds its shape, and slide it into your mouth. It's cold. That's the nicest thing you can say about it. The texture is like wet suede. It tastes of clove, mace, and something meaty that your brain refuses to name. You chew because it's expected, then swallow because you want this moment to end. The aftertaste settles across your tongue like a wet blanket doused in nutmeg. The nobleman laughs, claps you on the shoulder and digs in himself. Acquired taste, he says. You nod, because suffered through is probably not an acceptable response. Let's take a moment here to talk about one of the most confusing aspects of the medieval feast: pudding. The word meant something entirely different in this era. Today, it evokes soft, sweet comfort food. Back then, it was more like an edible dare. Medieval puddings could be sweet, sure, but they were just as often savoury, spicy, or packed with minced meats and offal. Blood pudding, liver pudding, stuffed entrails mixed with raisins. If it could be mashed and steamed in a casing, someone called it pudding, and someone else clapped politely after eating it. The pudding in front of you may or may not contain pork. There's a slick sheen on top that's definitely fat, and the texture is dense. Not crumbly, not creamy, just resistant. You push it aside and pretend you're full. That's a lie. You passed full 3 courses ago. What you are now is physically present and spiritually absent. Then, like a fever dream, something arrives at the table that actually looks appetizing. It's a tart. A real tart, golden and glistening, filled with what looks like pears, figs, or maybe dates soaked in spiced wine. You perk up slightly. It smells good. Sweet. Familiar. It might not kill you. You reach for a slice cautiously, aware that trust is a dangerous thing here, and take a bite. It's delicious. For a moment, just a flicker of human joy, you remember what pleasure feels like. The pastry is crisp, the filling warm and rich. You taste cinnamon, clove, and real fruit. Your shoulders relax slightly. You chew slowly, savouring the one food of the night that doesn't taste like it's been aged in a leather sack. Someone next to you smiles. You smile back. The musician plays something soft. It almost feels normal. And then you hear the sound. A thud, then a gasp, then another thud. You turn and see a man 2 tables over slump onto the floor. He's not moving. Another guest stands and takes 1 step before vomiting violently into his own goblet. A hush falls over the room, brief and tense. Then someone murmurs, "Too much pudding," and everyone laughs. Nervous, forced laughter. The kind that acknowledges death, but still wants to keep the party going. Now, let's clarify a myth. There was no such thing as a vomitorium in the medieval period. That's an ancient Roman architectural term, not a designated puking zone. But people did throw up during these feasts regularly, sometimes discreetly into handkerchiefs, sometimes dramatically under the table, and occasionally out the nearest window. It wasn't just the quantity of food, it was the quality, or lack thereof, rotting meat, boiled milk, mystery spices with digestive side effects, all of it stirred together and washed down with alcohol that could double as varnish remover. You're now watching what seems to be the slow, noble collapse of a nearby knight. He's gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles, eyes wide, lips pursed, as though holding back a torrent of internal betrayal. His squire pats his back gently. A servant offers a bowl. The knight declines with a dignity that's about to get him in trouble. Someone whispers that it was the eel pie. You reevaluate your life choices. Your own stomach churns again. You press your palm against it like you're trying to reason with it. "Not yet," you whisper under your breath. "Just hold on." You start breathing through your mouth, not to avoid the smell, which is a lost cause, but to trick your body into thinking it's already being ventilated. It doesn't help. You reach for a cup of wine. It's warm, sour. Not the good kind of sour, more the left on the windowsill since Easter kind. You drink it anyway. Maybe it'll knock you out. Across the room, another noble begins to sing, a long, drawn-out dirge that might be about love, or digestion, or the fall of a distant kingdom. His voice cracks halfway through the 3rd verse, and he sits down, defeated. The crowd claps politely. Someone slumps face first into a bread trencher. A hound licks his ear. And you're still sitting upright. Barely. One eyelid twitching, 1 foot asleep, a lump of mystery pudding congealing on your plate like it's waiting to hatch. You've eaten things tonight that would make modern health inspectors weep. Your body is exhausted. Your mind is fraying. Your tongue still tastes like cloves, and your jaw is stuck slightly open because chewing has become a betrayal of trust. But you've made it through dessert. Again, you're not proud, you're not well, but you're still here. For now, you're still in your seat, technically. Slouched, sliding, eyes half-lidded. one elbow braced on the edge of the sticky table like it's the only thing anchoring you to this realm. You've survived the courses, the sauces, the puddings, and even the unfortunate moment where a servant tried to offer you what turned out to be boiled sheep's tongue floating in a cinnamon glaze. You waved it away so slowly and solemnly it felt like a eulogy. And now you're waiting for the sweet embrace of fullness, darkness, anything to mark the end of this gluttonous fever dream. Which is exactly when someone leans in and says, "You know there's a special room for it." You blink. For what? Vomiting, of course. Of course, you nearly laugh. You want to laugh, but your core muscles are so overwhelmed from hours of maintaining basic digestive dignity that even a chuckle might be the wrong move. Still, the word sticks with you. Vomiting. Like a dirty little whisper floating just above the trenches and gravy-soaked linen. You've been skirting the edge of it all night, with your gut in full rebellion and your esophagus whispering, "One wrong bite, pal. One." Here's where we get to the big, widely misunderstood piece of the medieval puzzle, the legendary vomitorium. The place where supposedly Roman elites would retreat mid-feast to purge their stomachs and make room for more. It's a beautiful, horrible image, a designated chamber of indulgence and consequence. The problem? It's not true. The term vomitorium comes from Roman architecture and referred to an exit passage in a stadium, not a puking parlour. But somewhere along the way, that got twisted into a culinary urban legend, and by the time people started writing novels about debauched dining, the idea had stuck. But while the myth began with the Romans, that didn't stop medieval folks from doing something similar, just less formally. There were stories, some documented and others whispered, about guests slipping away during feasts to quietly lose their insides behind a curtain or out a window, or sometimes not quietly, not at all. There's at least one record of a noble vomiting mid-toast and then continuing the speech as if nothing happened. And it's not hard to believe, especially now, as you watch a man 3 seats down empty the contents of his belly into what appears to be a pewter wine jug. No one stops eating. No one even looks up. You swallow hard and try to think of snow, ice, cool mountain air, anything that isn't the steaming pile of meat juice-soaked bread in front of you. The smell is overwhelming, not in that, "wow, a roast is in the oven" way, more like a roast crawled into the oven, died, and was seasoned with mint jelly to cover the smell. Your nostrils flare. You start to sweat. Someone passes a bowl of what they're calling a medicinal cordial. You accept it gratefully, thinking maybe it'll settle your stomach. It doesn't. It tastes like cough syrup and despair. And it's warm, thick and spicy in a way that makes your tongue go numb. The man who handed it to you smiles. "Good for the humours," he says, as if that explains anything. You consider for a moment quietly excusing yourself, maybe make a dignified exit, but your legs are untrustworthy, your bench is actively leaning, and there's a distinct possibility that standing up would trigger the great reversal, an event you're not sure you could recover from socially or spiritually. Let's throw in a fringe fact while we're here. Medieval physicians really did believe digestion was driven by heat, literal heat generated by your stomach as it cooked the food like an oven. If you ate something cold or raw, it was thought to weaken your internal fire, hence the preference for heavy spices, cooked meats, hot wines, and warm tonics like the sludge you just drank. In theory, that cordial should be keeping your gut happy. In practice, your gut is building siege towers and preparing to storm the gates. Meanwhile, the feast continues around you like a carnival of culinary nihilism. Someone is trying to balance a roasted goose wing on their nose. A bard is playing a melody that sounds increasingly frantic, like the musical version of a man realizing he left his door unlocked during a bear migration. The air is thick with smoke, sweat, and the underlying knowledge that at least 4 people have been sick so far and no one has stopped serving food. The noblewoman across from you delicately sips from a crystal goblet and asks, "You're looking pale, stranger. Was it the eel?" You nod slowly, not trusting your vocal cords to do anything but betray you. "It's always the eel," she says, then downs the rest of her wine like a warrior preparing for battle. That's when it happens. Not to you, not yet. But someone near the Lord's dais lets out a retch so loud it cuts through the lute solo like a war horn. Chairs scrape, some people turn away. A servant rushes in with a cloth and a bucket, practiced, professional. The vomiter, a red-faced knight, is handed a new goblet immediately after. He drinks, wipes his mouth, and grins. This place is a stomach flu waiting to happen, and it's not slowing down, not even a little. A new course is being served, some kind of sugared rabbit in vinegar reduction. You don't care, you can't. Your tongue has gone on strike. You want nothing more than to lie down in the grass and let your body reset to factory settings. But instead you sit. You sit and you nod and you pretend to eat while your body sends warning flares from every internal organ. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the open, scholarly debate here. Did medieval nobles really eat until they vomited? Or is this just another exaggeration handed down through the centuries? Some argue that these were embellished tales, meant to shame the gluttonous rich or entertain the scandal-hungry public. Others insist that the wealthiest truly did gorge themselves beyond reason, and that vomiting was just part of the cycle, a thing you did so you could keep going. Historical accounts from visiting foreign dignitaries often describe feasts with such excess. It's hard to believe they didn't end in gastrointestinal catastrophe. You're now staring into a small bowl of something called almond milk soup. It's pale, thin, and vaguely resembles the aftermath of a sneeze. Someone tells you it's very good for cooling the liver. You make a noise. It could mean thank you, or please let me die. You're not sure. Neither are they. Your skin feels clammy. The fire is too hot. Your vision swims slightly every time you blink. You chew your lip, trying to refocus on something, anything, but the truth is, you're one overstuffed swallow away from joining the growing list of casualties. This is the moment you realise. Medieval feasts weren't just about food. They were a test of stomach, of spirit, of pure physical endurance. And tonight, you're failing. But you haven't vomited. Not yet. And in this world, that still makes you a champion. You haven't vomited. That's the good news. The bad news is your body has entered a fugue state. You're technically conscious, but your spirit has retreated to some quiet medieval forest in your mind where people eat fruit, drink fresh water, and don't end their evenings in meat sweat delirium. Meanwhile, your physical form remains slumped at the table, eyes glassy, mouth slightly open, hands resting palm down on either side of a bowl of spiced carrot pottage that looks like someone forgot how to cook halfway through the recipe and just gave up. You haven't taken a bite in at least 20 minutes, maybe longer. Time has blurred. The feast has broken loose from any natural order. People are no longer eating to enjoy, they're eating out of obligation, defiance, or sheer muscle memory. There's a sort of madness now, a slow, creeping chaos underneath the slurred toasts and off-key lute music. Everyone is flushed. Everyone is sweating. Everyone is digesting far more than the body was designed to process in one sitting. And now people are doing things under the table, literally. At first, it's just glances, furtive, sharp-eyed looks being exchanged between guests, as if they're silently sharing a secret. Then notes, small bits of parchment folded tightly, slipped discreetly beneath bread trenchers, or tucked inside napkins. You see one man pass something to his neighbour, while smiling, as if discussing the source. His neighbour nods, slides it into his sleeve, and continues eating his pigeon, as if nothing happened. Something is happening here. Something political, or personal, or lethal. Let's not forget, feasts weren't just food orgies, they were also power plays. These were places where alliances were formed, insults whispered, threats implied. The long tables, the forced proximity, the wine flowing like a leaky river. It all made the feast the perfect place for plotting. And you're sitting in the middle of it, looking like a dazed pilgrim who wandered in and accidentally ate 4 different types of nobility-only bird meat. A man you haven't spoken to all night leans over suddenly. "You came with Lord Renwick's group, didn't you?" he asks. You blink at him, unsure whether you should confirm, deny, or pretend to be a very lifelike roast. Before you can respond, he gives you a quick, sharp smile and says, "Tell him it's agreed then." And just like that, he turns back to his food. You have absolutely no idea who Lord Renwick is, you nod anyway. Across the table, 2 women are whispering rapidly behind their goblets. One slips a ring off her finger and passes it beneath the tablecloth. Another noble flicks a silver coin toward a servant, who catches it without looking and vanishes into the crowd. There's a hum of intrigue now, quiet but constant, like the sound of bees under floorboards. The feast is entering its political phase, and you, of course, are wildly unqualified to participate. You glance at the musicians, still playing but slower now, as if even they are starting to question their life choices. One of them is openly yawning between notes. Another has started plucking his lute with what looks like a chicken bone. The jester, now missing most of his bells and one shoe, is asleep in the corner with a napkin over his face like a medieval eye mask. This should be the part where the evening winds down, but no. Instead you watch as a small procession of servants enters bearing bowls of candied nuts, preserved fruits, and little pastries twisted into knots and dusted with something suspiciously white. Sugar? Lie? You don't know, you don't care, you're trying to keep your eyes open while pretending to be a competent social presence. Let's talk about one of the most underappreciated dangers of the medieval feast. Diplomacy. This is where favours were traded, grudges escalated, inheritances hinted at. One misstep, one wrong toast, and you could find yourself demoted, dishonoured, or dead. That's not hyperbole. There are entire historical events that started or ended over food and drink. One noble house insulted another over a spoiled pie, and boom, decades-long blood feud. Some of the most sinister deals in history were served alongside honey cakes. Now someone next to you is muttering about a bishop's cousin who's owed a parcel of land, and a knight across the room is pounding his fist into the table with what might be joy or fury. There's no way to tell anymore. It's all one big stew of power, gluttony, and hot meat breath. And the table? The table is no longer a surface, it's an ecosystem. You glance down and see a piece of pastry that's been crushed into your sleeve. Something sticky has adhered a spoon to your forearm. Your trencher, that poor soggy bread plate, has collapsed under its own weight and now lies in ruin. Half eaten, half soaked in 3 sauces. You look around and realise almost everyone's trencher is in a similar state. Crumbled, benzomagned, forgotten, and yet still technically food. That's the cruelest part of the medieval feast. Even the plate is edible, which means nothing ever really ends. Let's sprinkle in your scholarly debate. Were these under-the-table deals just dramatised later by romantic historians? Or did politics at the dinner table truly shape the course of medieval governance? Some say the idea of backroom deals at banquets was overstated, romanticised by writers trying to inject tension into dry chronicles. Others argue the feast was the perfect place to read people, test loyalties, and let the wine tease out truths better hidden. Based on the flurry of parchment slips and sideways glances happening around you, you're firmly siding with Team Intrigue. Someone drops a spoon, someone else steps on it. A chair tips. Another servant emerges from a side door with more pastries. You hear the words dowry, treason, and mushroom wine in the same sentence. At least 3 people have disappeared from the table entirely, their spot still occupied by uneaten food and gently steaming goblets. You, meanwhile, are trying to remain invisible. Not too invisible, of course. That would be suspicious. But invisible enough that no one asks your opinion about grain tariffs, or whose bloodline has the more legitimate claim to a goat-strewn hilltop in Normandy. You nod. You sip. You fold your hands politely on your lap and hope no one notices that your eyes have glazed over like a badly baked tart. Then someone passes you a note. You hesitate. It's just a small, folded piece of parchment, no name, no seal, no explanation. Everyone's pretending they didn't see it handed to you, which means everyone definitely did. You glance at the sender, a man in hack and a burgundy doublet with wine stains in the shape of what might be a map of France. He winks. You open the note. There's a single word written inside. Careful. You don't breathe. You fold it. You tuck it away. You slowly smile. You have no idea what it means or why it was given to you. Maybe it's a prank, maybe it's a warning, maybe you're sitting on top of a murder plot that started over a badly cooked duck. You look back at the table, now just a blur of flushed cheeks, whispering mouths and half-eaten politics. Whatever this feast was supposed to be, it's turned into something else entirely. You're not sure when it happens, exactly, but at some point during the political side-eye and pudding regret, the noise from outside starts to leak in. Faint at first, then louder. You hear shouting, laughter, someone banging a pot maybe. You glance toward the open hall doors and see the flicker of torchlight moving beyond the manor's outer walls. The air that drifts in carries a different kind of energy, earthy, sweatier, less perfumed. And then it hits you. The peasants are feasting too, just not like this. You shift in your sticky, wobbly seat and peer toward the shadows. Beyond this overwrought dining room, through the arched stone archways and down past the stables, a smaller bonfire burns. Figures move around it, quick, erratic, messy. There are no polished goblets or sugared peacock carcasses down there. Just smoke, rough wooden bowls, and a crowd of people whose dinner wasn't designed to impress anyone. You hear music, pipes, maybe a drum, not elegant, not refined, but it's joyful in a way this feast has long since stopped being. Let's be honest, this is the part of the story no one likes to dwell on. Because while you're here drowning in sauces with too many syllables and meat from endangered species, the people who actually grew the grain and slaughtered the livestock are eating whatever didn't make it onto these high tables. That's if they're lucky. Most of the time, a peasant's fare meant coarse bread, porridge, dried legumes, and maybe some leftover broth if the kitchen was feeling generous. And tonight they're celebrating from a distance. Not invited, of course, but they're close enough to hear the laughter and smell the gluttony. A servant catches your eye and follows your gaze. He leans in slightly and says, "They've got turnips and cider, might be better off." Then he vanishes before you can ask if that was a joke or an invitation. Meanwhile, the nobleman next to you is trying to stab a sugar-coated walnut with the wrong end of a knife. Someone further down the table is asleep with their cheek resting on a hunk of bread that's soaked up 3 different sauces and now resembles a pillow of despair. The feast is dragging. Or maybe it's you dragging. It's hard to tell. Here's your historical nugget. Peasants weren't always starving. In fact, in some periods, especially post-plague, the peasant diet improved thanks to labour shortages and better bargaining power. But on feast days, the difference between classes was visible, audible even. Nobles gorged themselves in halls like this one, surrounded by spices and imported wines. Peasants, meanwhile, might gather outdoors, drink watered ale, roast a rabbit if they were lucky, and dance in shoes made from scrap leather. Blur, yes, but sometimes better. Because their feasts weren't status games. They were survival parties. Joy drawn from scarcity, not a power statement wrapped in pastry. You sit back, overwhelmed with the realization that the people outside are having more fun. You're inside, bloated, sweating under 3 layers of wool and embroidered regret. Eating extinct bird with people who think your lineage is a punchline. They're outside barefoot, singing in rhythm, probably eating turnips with their hands, and not worrying whether it was cooked in saffron and scandal. That might be envy bubbling up, or just another wave of indigestion. It's getting harder to tell. Suddenly, a loud voice from the high table cuts through the noise. The lord, now visibly drunk and swaying in his seat, raises his goblet and declares, "Let the rabble have their scraps. Let them eat their roots and be thankful for the smell of our feast." The nobles laugh, hard, long, too long. One of them slams a chicken bone onto the table like it's a gavel. Another yells, "May they dream of pastry." It's disgusting. But no one says anything. A servant quietly collects a platter of half-eaten roasted venison and walks it to the rear of the hall. You watch as he slips through a side door, balancing the tray carefully, face unreadable. Maybe it's being thrown out, maybe not. Maybe it ends up by the fire pit outside where hungry hands break apart the meat that was too cold or too tough for noble mouths. You wonder if the people down there think they're lucky to get the scraps, or if they just accepted it. The way everyone in here accepts that status is measured in pie height and personal napkins. And then there's the unspoken thing, the part everyone inside this hall pretends not to know. Sometimes peasant feasts ended in fights too, not over sauces or territorial claims, but over real things, grain, wages, food shortages. Riots could start with a butcher refusing to sell meat at a fair price, with a priest drinking too much ale and mocking the wrong man's boots. The people outside knew about hunger, real hunger, the kind that wasn't followed by pudding and applause. You glance down at your table again, at the sticky, crumbling remains of excess. A bitten cherry tart, a pool of butter hardened around the edges, a goblet stained with 3 kinds of wine. You're surrounded by food and yet more nauseated than nourished. Everyone is. The feast has become a ritual of rot. You imagine walking outside, peeling off the layers of velvet and soaked linen, tossing your goblet aside and sitting down near that bonfire. Eating root stew with your fingers, drinking cider that hasn't been mulled, just shared. Breathing air that doesn't smell like roasted swan and broken dreams. Would they welcome you? Probably not. You're one of them now. You've sat at the table of those who hoard, who sneer, who gorge and call it grace. But maybe, just maybe, they'd hand you a crust of bread. Fresh, plain, still warm from the coals. The musicians strike up a new tune, something shrill and fast-paced, like they're trying to jolt life back into the room. The nobleman next to you shouts something about a game. You ignore him. Your eyes are fixed on the distant flicker of the peasant fire through the open doors, on the way the light dances on mud and faces that aren't pretending to be having fun. There's more truth in that fire than in this entire hall, and you're beginning to realise something that no one at your table wants to admit. This feast, it's not for you. You're not sure if it's the distant sound of fiddles outside or the fourth goblet of plum-infused something that kicks the next phase of the evening into motion, but suddenly the noble beside you slaps the table and bellows, "It's time for the dancing!" like he's just announced a holy war. The hall erupts into whoops and stomps, a chair tips, a ladle clatters to the floor. The musicians immediately switch to a wild, frenzied tune. A chaos of strings, pipes, and bells that sounds less like music and more like a herd of animals being chased through a wind chime factory. Before you can even pretend to object, someone grabs your arm, gently but with the strength of someone who's already danced through 3 wars and 2 divorces, and yanks you to your feet. You try to protest. "No, I'm full, very full, dangerously full." But the words die on your tongue, buried beneath the laughter and the drums and the primal realization that you are now, against your will, part of a medieval dance circle. Let's pause here and be clear about something. Medieval dancing isn't dancing the way you know it. There are no moves you can copy from a wedding video, no rhythm, no sense, no escape. It's more like a ritual. People hold hands, spin in circles, shout vaguely melodic phrases, and stomp in patterns that seem to have been invented by goats. You try to follow along, you try to move your legs, but your stomach, filled with questionable meats and existential despair, screams at you with every step. Your partner, a red-cheeked woman with strong calves and no sense of personal space, twirls you violently into a young squire who spins you back the other way with the kind of laughter that usually precedes a tavern brawl. Someone shouts, "To the left!" and the entire circle veers that way with the precision of a drunken canoe crew. You stumble, you spin, you step on someone's foot, you apologise, they laugh, they step on your foot. That's apparently the rhythm now. Here's your historical footnote. Dancing after a feast wasn't optional, it was expected. A full belly was no excuse. You danced to celebrate, to impress, to flirt, to hide the fact that your left eye was twitching from pie fatigue. And if you were important enough, people watched you dance to judge your grace, your vitality, and whether you looked like someone whose offspring wouldn't immediately die of gout. Meanwhile, your stomach is sending up signals like it's sinking into the sea. Your heart pounds, your legs are jelly, and somewhere in your midsection, a suspicious gurgle has taken up permanent residence. You twist in time with the circle, trying not to make eye contact with anyone in case they invite you to spin faster. You're absolutely, positively not built for this. Then come the jumps. Yes, the jumps. Because apparently this dance requires everyone in the circle to leap. Synchronized, high, joyous. And you're not in a leaping place right now, but it's happening. The noblewoman to your left squeezes your hand. Someone shouts, "Up!" And suddenly you're airborne. Barely. You come back down with a graceless thud, your knees threatening to fold me. Something inside you sloshes. There's a moment of panic, but then nothing. Disaster is avoided. For now, the dance continues, faster, louder. The music surges, the crowd spins. You glance across the circle and see someone vomit discreetly behind a pillar, then return to the formation like a hero. Another guest fakes an ankle injury and hobbles away to safety. You consider joining him. Here's a quirky fact to distract you while your internal organs threaten mutiny. Some medieval dances were believed to have protective or even magical properties. There are accounts of people dancing to ward off illness, famine, even death. That sounds noble, until you realise the same sources also mention spontaneous outbreaks of mass dancing, like the infamous dancing plague of 1518, where people literally danced themselves to death, a real thing, caused by stress, bad bread, or maybe just the medieval version of a breakdown. You start to wonder if you're about to become a case study. The song changes. Again. Now it's slower, more romantic. Couples form, hands clasp, eyes meet. You freeze, hoping you'll be left out. But no, someone taps your shoulder. A new partner. Taller than you, smiling, too confident. You nod, dizzy, and accept. Your hands meet. The music swells, and suddenly you're dancing face to face in a strange, slow circle that would be beautiful if it weren't actively murdering your pancreas. You try to stay upright. You try not to belch. You focus on your partner's eyes. They're kind. You don't want to ruin their evening by collapsing into their arms like a pudding-filled statue. You step, sway, turn, and they say something about the moonlight. You nod and smile. You're sweating through your soul. Let's acknowledge another layer of torture here. Dancing wasn't just exercise, it was courtship. Every step was loaded with meaning. Who you danced with, how often, how well. A stumble could mean embarrassment. A well-executed turn, an invitation. You don't have the coordination or liver function to navigate that world tonight. You barely have enough muscle control to bow. Finally, mercifully, the music slows, the tune fades, people applaud, someone yells, "Another round!" The musicians groan and start tuning their lutes again, but for now, there's a pause. You stagger back to your bench, collapse like a sack of wet laundry and try to breathe. Everything inside you sloshes. Your pulse is in your forehead. Your shirt is clinging to your back like a second skin made of shame. A servant hands you a cloth, you wipe your face, and then he hands you a goblet of something cool. It's clear. Water. Actual water. You nearly cry. You sip slowly like it's holy. It tastes like life, like everything you've been denied. It settles you slightly, brings you back. You look around. Half the dancers are seated now, their cheeks pink, their eyes dazed. A few are lying on the floor, arms spread, panting. One man is curled around a roast goose like it's his emotional support animal. The music picks up again, and with it another round of stomping and shouting. You stay seated. You will not survive a second dance. Your organs have made that clear. But in this moment, sweaty and sore and swirling with regret, you realise something strangely beautiful. For all the chaos, all the discomfort, there is joy here. Strange, twisted, stomach-churning joy. Even as people collapse, even as hearts race and knees buckle, they keep dancing. Because if they stop, they have to reckon with how full they are, how drunk, how fragile. So they dance. Because not dancing, that's what you do at funerals. You're no longer seated so much as propped. One hip half off the bench, your upper back clinging to the tapestry behind you for structural support. Arms limp, fingers curled around a goblet you don't remember picking up. The dancing continues, less structured now, more like a seizure happening to music. The nobleman who earlier claimed he once hunted swan with a slingshot is now attempting a spinning hop that looks like an exorcism in motion. A lady nearby has kicked off her shoes and is stomping in rhythm, barefoot and wild-eyed, laughing like she's free of all earthly laws. You're not sure if this is celebration or mass delirium. But then it starts, soft at first like a quiet rebellion inside your gut. A flutter, a shift, a small treacherous pop of air that you very much did not authorize. You freeze, eyes wide, spine stiff. Your body has decided that the time for diplomacy is over, and it's now enacting its own scorched earth policy. Let's talk flatulence. Nobody wants to, but let's, because you're about to become a walking cautionary tale. The combination of trenchers soaked in meat grease, spicy wines, boiled root vegetables, and five different types of poultry has turned your digestive system into a medieval foundry, complete with smoke, heat, and occasional bursts of fire. You're gassy, monumentally gassy. This isn't the sort of issue you can walk off. This is the kind that calls for divine intervention. And yet no one seems to be shocked. Around you, little noises are happening. Chairs creak, bellies gurgle. Someone lets out a low, unmistakable sound that makes a hound lift its head from under the table and leave. Someone fans themselves dramatically. Another person coughs just as a suspicious pop echoes off the stone wall. You've entered the most underappreciated chapter of any medieval feast, the flatulent hour. Here's your historical fact. Yes, people farted at feasts. And while manners books from the later Middle Ages suggested holding it in, not everyone had the discipline or the dignity. Some etiquette manuals from the 14th and 15th centuries gently advised guests to excuse themselves if they needed to pass wind, while others pretended that such things simply didn't happen among civilized folk. But the reality? You cram that many people into a hall, feed them too much wine and cheese, and something's going to give. You're giving now, slowly. You shift your weight. It doesn't help. Your intestines are building pressure like a siege engine. Someone hands you another piece of something, maybe cheese, maybe regret. You wave it away with trembling fingers and try to smile, but your face muscles are too busy rerouting emergency systems. The guest next to you leans in. "All right?" he asks, slightly too loud. You nod. "Just full." He chuckles. "We all are. My cousin burst a button after the mutton last year. Loudest sound I've ever heard." He laughs again, then casually releases a short, sharp toot into the cushion beneath him. Doesn't flinch. Just keeps drinking. You stare at him like he's a prophet. He nods sagely. "Better out than in." Another man across the table is now humming softly while rubbing his belly in clockwise circles, possibly as a prayer, possibly as an ancient ritual to summon relief. A young woman stands, takes 2 careful steps away from the table, and lets out a small, unmistakable squeak of air. She turns red. No one says a word. This is the way now. The hall smells like roasted meat, wine, sweat, and something else, something sulphurous. A creeping stink that seeps in slow and patient, like it knows it's inevitable. Someone tries to cover it with a sprig of rosemary. Someone else drops their entire goblet. Whether out of shock or an attempt to mask a sound is unclear. The fire flickers. You grip your stomach and try to remember what fresh air feels like. Let's not skip over this. Flatulence wasn't just a personal matter. It could be weaponized at the medieval table. In some court circles, a well-timed fart was used to mock rivals or disrupt conversations. There were even professional jesters who included it in their acts. One famous flatulist, yes, that's a real word, named Roland the Farter, was gifted land for his yearly performance involving a jump, a whistle, and a fart. That was his job. You're just trying to survive. You feel it building again. The pressure is back, urgent now. You lean forward slightly, praying for stealth. The moment passes, and with it, a small, delicate whistle. You freeze. Did anyone hear it? A servant walks by, his nose wrinkles. You pretend to examine a nearby bowl of stewed prunes like it contains ancient wisdom. The moment fades. You're safe. For now. Across the hall, the bear, still present, still inexplicably part of this, lets out a thunderous growl. People cheer, someone shouts, "Even the beast has opinions," and raises a goblet. The musicians laugh mid-song. The whole place reeks of bodily rebellion and excessive merriment. And still the food hasn't stopped. The servants now carry in dishes of warm nuts, sticky confections, and something that might be deep-fried apples, or possibly just apples that fell into the fire. The plates clatter onto the table, jostling cups and elbows. More sugar, more oil, more betrayal. You're past eating, past dignity. Now your mission is just containment. You brace your knees, press your hands into your thighs, and breathe through your nose. You will not explode. Not here. Not like this. Then someone starts a game. A nobleman rises, swaying slightly, and it announces something called the passing of the goose. It's a dancing game, he says, involving music, a stuffed bird, and something about honour. No one understands the rules, but everyone cheers. A servant hands him the goose. He stumbles into the centre of the room. The music starts again. Fast, chaotic. The kind of tempo that incites either dancing or revolution. People clap, they stomp, they laugh. The nobleman clutches the goose, does a wobbly spin, and lets out the loudest fart of the night. And the room erupts into applause. People cheer, they raise their goblets, and someone shouts, "The goose has spoken!" and falls to the floor laughing. The nobleman bows, goose tucked under one arm, dignity completely discarded. The game has changed. The goal apparently is now to pass the goose and accompany it with your own personal song. And so the goose begins its journey. You watch as it travels from guest to guest, each person letting out their best and worst attempt at flatulent fanfare. Some are subtle, some are loud. One woman simply holds the goose and smiles as everyone around her erupts in laughter, because that's apparently how power works now. The lord of the manor himself is clutching his sides, red-faced, tears streaming. Your turn is coming. The goose is passed closer, closer. And you stand, you smile, and for the first time all night, you do what everyone else has already embraced. You let it go. You've crossed some strange threshold now, there's no other way to put it. The moment the goose left your hands, along with the last scrap of your dignity, something shifted. The crowd cheered, the lord laughed so hard he fell off his chair, and someone across the hall banged a goblet on the floor and declared, "This feast is legend." And in that delirious, gas-fueled madness, you find yourself strangely at peace. Not comfortable, mind you. Your body still feels like a bloated wineskin stuffed with regret and half-digested swan. But mentally, emotionally, you've surrendered. You're not fighting it anymore. The feast has broken you down like a slow boil, and now you're part of it. A sticky, spinning, belching cog in this medieval meat wheel. You sink back onto your bench and smile at no one in particular. Around you, the energy is still swirling, dancing, shouting, clapping, the occasional thud of someone collapsing onto the rushes. The hall smells like wet wool, roasted garlic, wine fumes, and faint shame. In a way, it's beautiful. In a much more honest way, it's absolutely horrifying. And now they bring out the digestives. Yes, because after 12 meat courses, 5 desserts, a dance that nearly killed you, and a goose-fueled fart symphony, what everyone clearly needs is a tray of strong herbal liquors designed to settle the stomach. A servant passes you a tiny glass of something that smells like licorice and vinegar had a child. You hold it with trembling fingers. Someone toasts to survival, and you instinctively raise yours in reply. It burns going down, not the warm, cozy burn, the exorcism burn. It clears your sinuses, scalds your throat, and drops into your gut like a hot coal. You cough once, violently, and then feel oddly better. Not good, not whole, but functional. You glance around. Others are doing the same, sipping little glasses, some laughing through tears, others silently evaluating whether this was a medicinal drink or just lamp oil in disguise. But no one refuses it. Because this is tradition. After a medieval feast, it wasn't enough to survive. You had to cleanse, reset, maybe prepare for the nightmare to come later. Here's your historical context. Medieval digestives weren't just for show. They were often infused with herbs, anise, fennel, ginger, mint, believed to help with digestion. Think of them as very early Tums, if Tums tasted like betrayal and came in a goblet the size of your thumb. Apothecaries sometimes prepared special batches for lords or abbots, and some nobles even had stomach waters they swore by, made with bizarre ingredients like wormwood galangal or powdered pearls. You're fairly sure yours contains at least one of those, and probably some floor debris as well. You're not the only one experiencing mixed results. A merchant 2 seats away takes a sip, makes a sound like a dying horse, and slams his glass down in triumph. A woman with hair like braided rope knocks hers back and yells, "That'll chase the demons!" before burping loudly enough to startle a bird from the rafters. Even the servants are in on it now, snatching tiny gulps in the corners between trips to clear trencher debris and mop up spills of indeterminate origin. You try to stand. That's cute. You get about halfway upright before your knees remind you that they've been folded into unnatural angles for hours, and your gut shifts like tectonic plates mid-eruption. You freeze, mid-rise, resembling an awkward puppet, then slowly lower yourself again. The bench groans in sympathy. Your head is buzzing. Not drunk exactly, although definitely not sober, but more like someone replaced your blood with hot cider and indecision. You lean back against the wall and feel the cool stone pressing into your spine. For a moment it's bliss. That's when the entertainment returns. Remember the jester? The one who earlier tried to juggle fish and then passed out in a basket of pears? He's back, wobbling, wide-eyed and newly rebelled. You don't know how or why, but someone gave him a trumpet. And not just any trumpet. A long, curved, dented brass monster that looks like it's seen battle. He raises it to his lips and, with the breath of man who's consumed nothing but ale and attention, blows. The sound that emerges is less musical and more apocalyptic. People cheer, you nearly fall off your bench, a jester bows dramatically, then begins a strange dance that involves hopping on one foot, spinning and randomly yelling the word bladder at full volume. It might be genius. It might be trauma. At this point no one cares. This is your fringe fact for the night. Jesters had a lot of freedom in the medieval world, more than most. They could mock the Lord, make crude jokes, even comment on politics. They were expected to be weird, unsettling, even disgusting. Some were musical, some were acrobats. Others specialised in what could only be called bodily comedy. Yes, flatulence routines were real. Some jesters trained in making noises with their armpits. Others recited poetry and burps. Tonight's jester seems to be a generalist. He does it all. And while the nobility howls with laughter and pound their tables, you watch from your daze, nodding slowly, as if any of this makes sense. It doesn't. You've just accepted that it's normal now. Someone beside you whispers, "He's better than the last one. That guy set his beard on fire." You nod politely like you understand what better means anymore. But even in this madness, the hall is shifting. The noise is still loud, but less sharp. The fires are burning lower. Some candles have guttered out entirely, leaving flickering shadows. People are starting to recline more than sit. Boots are kicked off, belts loosened. One man is snoring into a plate of quince jelly. You realise what this is, the descent. Every medieval feast had its slope. You start at pomp and power, rise through spectacle, hit the apex of gluttony, then slide into the murky depths of collapse. That's where you are now. The warm, messy, soft-edged ending. It's the part no one writes songs about. The aftermath, the wobble, the nap. You stretch one leg under the table and hit something soft, possibly human. You don't investigate. You take another tiny sip of your digestive and feel it coat your tongue like spicy syrup. You can't tell if it's helping or killing you. Probably both. And now the Lord stands again. His tunic is crooked. His hair looks like it's fought a windstorm. He raises his goblet, sloshing, and shouts, "Tonight we have feasted as kings." He pauses. "Tomorrow may we remember none of it." Laughter. Applause. Someone throws a piece of bread. He grins, bows, and promptly sits on the floor. Not intentionally. He missed the chair. No one helps him up, and no one has to, because that, in a weird way, is the truest tradition of all. By now, the feast hall resembles the aftermath of a poorly planned siege. Bodies are draped across benches like discarded cloaks. Goblets lie on their sides, dripping the last trails of their spiced contents into puddles of sticky despair. You're no longer fully seated, nor fully upright. You exist in a state of medieval purgatory, half slumped, half dreaming, propped against the same tapestry you've been sweating into for hours. It smells like dust, mildew and roast goose. Your legs are numb. Your tongue tastes like an herb garden died in your mouth. But you're alive, sort of. The fires crackle low in their hearths, casting lazy amber shadows across the walls. The torchlight flickers like it's winking out on purpose, and the musicians, bless them, are playing what can only be described as the medieval version of a lullaby. A lute, a soft drumbeat, something vaguely resembling a harp, but probably just a bow strung over a cheese grater. The tempo is slow now. Everyone's pace has slowed. You'd call it peaceful if you weren't actively trying to suppress the creeping dread of imminent intestinal betrayal. Across the table, the noblewoman who once danced barefoot is now reclining with her hair unbraided, sipping the dregs from a half-full jug like it's holy water. Next to her, the merchant is arguing softly with his squire about whether or not figs are a good pre-sleep snack. You wouldn't know. You've only ever used figs to garnish trauma. Then, without warning, the priest arrives. Yes, a priest. Late to the party, robed and bleary-eyed, like he just crawled out of a barrel of incense. He enters through a side door and immediately begins blessing things. The fireplace, the food, the guests, the jester who yells, "Not me, I'm too far gone!" before cartwheeling into a pile of rushes. The priest stands at the head of the high table and clears his throat. "It is now time," he declares solemnly, "for the Compline blessing. Let us give thanks." You almost groan out loud. You'd forgotten this part. The religious wrap-up. The final liturgical bow tied around the grotesque roast of indulgence. The guests shift, some kneel, others just bow their heads in quiet desperation. You bow your head too, if only because keeping it upright would take more muscle control than you currently possess. Here's your historical footnote. Medieval feasts didn't always end in prayer, but for those that did, especially in noble or religious households, it was customary to thank God for the meal, the company, and the fact that no one choked to death on a quail bone. Compline, one of the canonical hours, marked the official end of the monastic day. It was quiet, reflective, designed to calm the mind before sleep. Which, let's be honest, is a deeply ironic expectation after watching half the court participate in a farting contest while wearing feathers. But the priest soldiers on. He speaks in Latin. Maybe. Or something close to it. No one corrects him. You hear words like benedictio, and gratias, and digestio. That last one is probably improvised. As he drones on, you let your eyes drift shut, not in reverence, but in self-defense. And that's when your memory finally decides to replay the note. Careful. You blink, straighten a little. That crumpled parchment you stuffed into your belt earlier in the evening. The one handed to you during the political whispers and pudding chaos. You'd completely forgotten about it. Probably because you've spent the last 3 hours trying not to die. But now it reappears in your thoughts with irritating clarity. You reach down and discreetly pull it out. Still one word, still ominous. You glance around, trying to gauge whether you should be bracing for poison, blackmail, or just more pudding. Everyone seems docile, lethargic. No one's lunging across the table or brandishing cutlery. The Lord is snoring on the floor. A servant is using a trencher as a pillow. The only movement comes from a rat dragging off a candied walnut like it's hauling treasure into a hole in the wall. You pocket the note again. Maybe it meant nothing, or maybe it's meant for tomorrow, when the stomachs revolt and the chamber pots overflow and someone remembers that political favours were promised over custard. You'll deal with that later. For now, the blessing ends. The priest gives a tired smile, raises his hands one last time, and mutters something that might be, "Peace be with you," though it could also be, "Good luck surviving this." Then he turns, exits the same way he came, and is never seen again. A servant rings a small bell and something shifts in the room. It's subtle but real. People begin to rise, slowly, painfully. The feast is ending, not with a bang, but with groans and the soft squelch of meat-fat-soaked boots. Some guests shuffle toward the great doors, others stagger to side chambers, and a few simply lie down where they are, defeated and full beyond reason. You attempt to stand again. This time it works. Barely. Your knees creak. Your spine cracks. Something in your lower back shifts in a way that implies future medical bills. You step forward, tentatively, like a fawn learning to walk, but drunk and sore and 30 pounds heavier than when you arrived. And now comes the final trial, the exit procession. Because this is still a noble affair and appearances must be upheld. You can't just slither out the back like a jellyfish in boots. You must leave in order, status first, then guests, then retainers, then presumably the janitor. And you're somewhere in the middle, which means you must parade past the high table, the hearth, the musicians, and the bear, who is now asleep with its head resting on a heap of trampled pears. You straighten your tunic, try to arrange your face into something that resembles gratitude rather than gastrointestinal agony. You join the line of slowly advancing guests. Here's a final historical gem. This part of the feast, the exit, was still very much a performance. Nobles were expected to bow or curtsy, thank the host, offer compliments on the roast peacock or the clarity of the wine. Those who stumbled or looked too intoxicated risked losing face, status, or, in extreme cases, waking up tomorrow with fewer titles and a lot more questions. Your turn comes. You reach the high table. The Lord is still asleep in a crumpled pose that suggests he's either blessed or cursed. A servant beside him nods at you. "His Grace thanks you for your presence," he says without moving his lips. You nod back, whisper, "And I thank God I survived," and continue walking. The hallway beyond is cool, dim, and blessedly silent. You feel the cold night air brush against your face like absolution. Somewhere behind you a goblet drops. Somewhere ahead, a breeze carries the sound of peasant songs. For the first time in hours you inhale without gagging. You've done it! You've lived through the feast, but your journey, far from over. Outside the feast hall, the night greets you like a long-lost friend, cool, quiet, and mercifully free of boiling sauces or trumpet solos. The stars are out, scattered across the sky like salt on black velvet. A half-moon hangs low and crooked, like it's leaning in to whisper, "You should be dead." And honestly, it's not wrong. You walk slowly, carefully through the castle courtyard, your body moving with the stiff, painful precision of someone wearing armour made entirely out of bloated regret. The wind brushes your cheeks, carrying the sweet scent of earth, hay, and wood smoke. You pause, inhale deeply, and nearly cry when your lungs fill with air that doesn't smell like stale meat grease and 7-hour stew. For the first time in what feels like weeks, you unclench your jaw. Your stomach grumbles, not in hunger, but in confusion. "Wait," it seems to say. "Are we free?" Not quite, but almost. You follow a stone path away from the hall toward the guest quarters, or maybe just somewhere quiet where you can lie down and reassess your entire relationship with food. The castle looms behind you, its torches flickering along the battlements, casting soft golden light on the walls. You hear faint echoes, laughter, the low moan of a lute being packed away, the unmistakable sound of someone vomiting into a planter. Inside, the feast is still unwinding. You are not missed. You are not needed. You are at last slipping out of the beast's gaping, gravy-soaked mouth. But just before you disappear into the safety of shadow, you catch a sound, a different one. Music. Not the frantic strings and flutes of the feast hall, but a raw, simple rhythm. Drums, pipes, a voice lifted in a song with no harmonies and no concern for pitch. It's coming from beyond the castle wall. The peasants, still feasting, still dancing, long after the nobles have collapsed in their chairs like half-melted wax figures. You drift toward it, drawn by curiosity or envy, or both. The castle's main gates are propped open, guarded only by a pair of drowsy watchmen, who don't even blink as you shuffle past. Beyond them, the field glows with firelight. A bonfire crackles high, its sparks rising like tiny stars, and around it, people laugh, stomp, twirl and drink from shared clay cups. Their clothes are worn, their shoes are rough, and not one of them smells like rosewater or regret. You keep your distance at first. You're still wearing noble clothes, even if they're stained and wrinkled, and smell like swan gravy and failure. But then a little girl notices you, points and waves. You freeze. She runs to you, grabs your hand and pulls with surprising force. "Dance!" she yells. "You look like you need it." She's right. You're not sure if it's exhaustion or delirium, but something propels your feet forward and suddenly you're in the circle, moving to a rhythm that doesn't require coordination or decorum, just present. The music is primal, earthy, the kind that lives in your bones. You sway, you clap, you do something that might be a spin or might be your body trying to stabilize itself. No one laughs, no one judges. They're too busy laughing with each other. Here's a thought they don't put in textbooks. This is probably the most alive you've felt all day. And here's your historical nugget to match. While noble feasts were about display and dominance, peasant festivals were about survival and joy. These communal gatherings were rare, usually tied to the seasons, harvests, or religious holidays. People brought what they could: a carrot, a flask of cider, a crust of rye. They shared stories, they gossiped, they danced with the kind of reckless abandon only possible when you've lived a life too hard to afford self-consciousness. It wasn't opulence, it was release. Someone hands you a wooden bowl. Inside, a thick stew, vegetables, barley, something leafy, something maybe even green. It smells honest. You hesitate. Your stomach grumbles again, quieter this time, more thoughtful than panicked. You dip a finger in, taste. It's good, it's really good. Not complicated, not spicy, not disguised beneath 10 layers of aromatic pretense, just warm, real food. You eat slowly, savouring every bite like it's a secret. Your stomach seems to perk up, confused by this unfamiliar concept of gentle nourishment. It's like feeding a feral cat after years of throwing rocks at it. You sit on the grass. Someone sits beside you. An old woman with thick hands and no teeth. She doesn't ask who you are. She just offers you a piece of dark bread, still warm from the fire. You take it. "Feast, huh?" she says, watching the castle over your shoulder. You nod. "It tried to kill me," she snorts. "That's the job of a proper feast." You both stare at the fire. People are still dancing. Children are chasing each other with sticks. A boy tries to balance a jug on his head and fails spectacularly. Everyone cheers. And in this moment, a strange calm settles over you. You've escaped the madness. You've walked through the fire and come out, albeit sweaty and deeply gassy, on the other side. You might even sleep tonight. Your body is sore, your tunic stained, and your dignity buried somewhere beneath the third pudding course. But you're here. You're breathing cool night air. You're eating stew that doesn't make you question your faith. You're safe, or so you think, because as you lean back into the grass, a shadow appears beside you. Not a dancer, not a peasant. A figure in a dark cloak, hood pulled low, standing just at the edge of the firelight. They step closer and press a note into your hand. You look down. The same parchment, the same scrawl. Careful, you look up. But they're gone. You stare at the note like it might catch fire in your palm. Same coarse parchment, same cramped handwriting. Just that one word, careful, scratched in dark ink, slightly smeared at the edges like it was written in a rush. Or with wet hands, or by someone who doesn't worry about details because they're too busy slipping messages to strangers in the middle of feasts that may or may not double as murder plots. You turn it over, but there's nothing else, no name, no mark, not even a smudge to indicate where they came from. Your eyes scan the firelight. Dancers spin and leap, children run in circles, shrieking, in the delightful feral way only children can. The stew pot is still bubbling. Someone has started telling a dirty story on the far side of the fire, and the entire circle is in uproarious laughter. No one seems suspicious, no one even looks at you, but they're watching. Someone is. The note burns in your hand, not literally, but with a kind of creeping paranoia that makes you aware of how exposed you are. You're sitting on the ground outside castle walls, surrounded by strangers, wearing noble clothes that are now 2 hours past respectability. You crumple the note in your fist and tuck it under your tunic. For a second you consider ignoring it, just tossing the warning into the fire, brushing it off as a drunk prank or a leftover anxiety from the eel pie. But something about the way it was delivered, silently, deliberately, tells you this is no joke. You're being watched, and not by the joyful stew-eaters. Let's inject a historical dose here. Espionage wasn't just the stuff of kings and wars. In the Middle Ages, information was currency, and everyone was buying. Castles like the one you just escaped from were breeding grounds for whispers. Servants, scribes, cooks, and even jesters. Anyone could be a spy. Sometimes they were hired by rival lords. Sometimes they worked for the church. Sometimes, terrifyingly, they worked for no one, collecting secrets just in case they needed them later. Blackmail? That was basically a team sport. And feasts? Perfect cover. Noise, chaos. Drunken nobles running their mouths. Dozens of strangers passing cups and slipping parchment. It was like a gossip market if the produce could get you exiled. You look back toward the castle. The windows are glowing dimly now, the sounds of the great hall muffled into background sloshes and snores. You try to replay the night in your mind. Who might have seen too much? Heard too much? You did get that mystery message during the pudding phase, the one you pretended to understand. Someone said something about Lord Renwick. Someone else whispered it about land, debt, war. Were you accidentally enlisted in a plot? You shiver, not from the wind, which is gentle and cool, but from the sudden weight of that possibility. You were supposed to be a guest. A body at the table, a novelty, a walking stomach with decent posture. But now you're holding secrets you didn't ask for. A peasant man plops down next to you. Late middle-aged sun-creased face, eyes that squint even in the dark. He doesn't speak right away. Just chews something, a roasted root maybe, and hands you a crude wooden cup of cider. You accept it, sip. It's dry, a little sour, and wildly refreshing. First feast? He asks, grinning sideways. You nod. Survived it. Barely. He chuckles. They always end in ghosts or gout. He leans back, watching the fire. Saw you earlier, near the high table. Your pulse stumbles. Yeah, lucky invite. Luck, he repeats, amused. That what it was? You glance at him. He doesn't look threatening. No cloak, no dagger. No unnaturally still posture that screams trained killer. Just a man with weathered boots and stew stains on his knees. But his eyes don't match the rest of him. Sharp, focused, studying you like you're not quite playing the same game. Lot of things passed around in that hall, he says. Wine, pudding, promises. People forget what they say when their mouth is full of duck and ambition. You nod slowly, unsure what to say. He shrugs. Just saying. When you wake up tomorrow might want to be somewhere else. And then he stands and walks off, disappearing behind the stew pot like he was never there. You finish your cider in one long pull, your throat tight. That makes 2 messages, 2 strangers, and a whole lot of implications that tonight was more than just food and dancing and involuntary digestive jazz solos. Now comes the choice. Do you return to the guest quarters inside the castle? Slip into the straw mattress they've prepared for you, under the same roof where secrets stew in the shadows and noble tongues loosen like poorly knotted shoelaces? Or do you disappear into the peasant camp, pretend you're a baker's cousin from 3 villages over, and let the noble world unravel without you? There's risk either way. One path leads back to comfort and luxury, and possibly being accidentally poisoned with almond-scented wine. The other leads to obscurity, cold nights, and cabbage-based anonymity, but probably less risk of being turned into a political pawn or framed for some baron's indigestion-induced confession. Before you can decide, another gust of wind picks up, rustling the trees near the field's edge. Something moves there. Not a dancer, not a local. A tall figure in dark clothing standing just past the firelight, watching, not moving, not pretending, just watching. You lock eyes with them for a heartbeat, and they vanish. Not walk away, not duck, just gone. You stand slowly, knees aching, gut wobbling, heart thudding a little too fast for someone who just had 3 puddings and a near-death dance experience. The fire crackles behind you, the laughter continues, but the moment has soured. Someone is following you. Not just observing, following. And that means this is bigger than pudding. You press the note against your thigh, feel its crinkle through the fabric. You don't know who wrote it, but they were right. Careful, you can't go back to the castle tonight. Not with that thing, whoever they are, still in the shadows. Not with whatever you accidentally heard, misheard, or nodded at during the roasted goose negotiations. The feast may be over, but whatever it fed into, that's just beginning. The decision makes itself, really. You don't consciously plan to run or hide or fake your own death with a strategically placed meat pie. You just start walking, slow at first, cautious, then faster. Past the outer ring of dancers, past the last circle of straw mats and stew bowls, through the grass that flattens softly beneath your borrowed shoes. You keep to the edge of the firelight, not breaking into a run, not turning your head. Because if there's anything you've learned tonight, it's this. The moment you look back, you become a target. The sounds of the peasant revel fade behind you. Laughter, clapping, the occasional discordant note from a homemade pipe. Ahead it's darker. A narrow path curves along the base of the hill, winding through small trees and shrubs that rustle with every step. The moon, still crooked and too bright, hangs above like a silent witness. You take a deep breath. It smells like moss and damp leaves. It does not smell like duck fat or clove pudding, which feels like a miracle. You have no idea where you're going. You just know you're not staying. And here's where the mind games begin, because now every twig snap is a footfall, every owl hoot is a coded signal, every rustle of wind becomes a conspirator brushing past you in the dark. You reach instinctively for the dagger you don't have and remember with a jolt that you're not a spy. You're just a bloated guest in wrinkled finery with pastry crust under your fingernails and 3 conflicting political secrets swirling in your brain. You duck beneath a low branch. A bat flutters past your ear and you flinch, immediately convinced it's an assassin in disguise. Ridiculous, of course, but after everything you've seen tonight, is it really that far-fetched? You've eaten birds that were dyed and lit on fire. You've watched nobles pass notes like they were in a Shakespearean subplot. A man actually juggled with eel. And let's not forget the figure, the watcher, the one who was just standing there motionless beyond the peasant firelight. They're still out there. Let's pause for a quick historical reflection before your heart gives out. Medieval travel at night wasn't exactly encouraged. Most people stayed inside after sundown, especially in rural areas. Roads were unlit, full of ditches, thieves, wild animals, and the occasional disoriented monk. But nobles, or anyone connected to noble circles, had a different risk profile. If someone wanted you gone, it didn't take much. A push down a ravine, a dagger under the ribs, a helpful herbal tonic that turned out to be 80% belladonna. A lot of people vanished quietly, their disappearance chalked up to wolves or God's will. So you stick to the path, head down, legs aching. You reach a low stone wall, part of an old boundary marker probably, and climb over it gracelessly. Your boots scrape, your knee crunches. You land in a patch of grass that immediately tries to swallow your left foot in mud. Perfect. You trudge on, increasingly aware that you're not dressed for stealth or survival. If someone's chasing you, you're basically a walking torch in a sequined doublet. Still no footsteps behind you. No whispers, just trees, just wind. You crest a small rise and there, blessedly, absurdly, is a cottage. Tiny, thatched, tilted slightly to one side like it had too much cider. A single light flickers behind its shuttered window. There's a fence made of mismatched wood scraps and a goat asleep beside a barrel. You hesitate. Approaching strangers at night is rarely wise, but freezing to death, or collapsing in a ditch because you're 40% venison at this point, also seems unwise. You knock, no answer. You knock again, softer, still nothing. You try the door, it opens. Inside it's warm. Not feast hall warm, not roaster boar on the rug warm, but gentle, lived-in warm. A fire glows in a small hearth. A kettle sits atop it, steaming gently. The room smells of thyme, and ash and boiled onions. A narrow bed stands in the corner. A stool, a chest, simple sturdy things, and sitting in the chair by the fire is an old man. Eyes closed, hands folded, breathing. You freeze. "Sorry," you whisper. "I didn't mean to." He opens one eye. Feast? He asks. You nod. He grunts. Knew it. Always sends at least one of you out here. Sit down before you pass out and ruin the rug. You blink. You were expecting? Not you specifically, he mutters. But someone. Always someone. That castle eats its own. You sit. You don't question it. The chair creaks under your weight. Your muscles hum with fatigue. The old man pours something from the kettle into a chipped cup and hands it to you. Drink this. Don't ask what's in it. You drink it. It tastes like moss, metal, and a hint of apple. You don't hate it. Interest. Your stomach growls once in confusion, then settles like a scolded child. Let me guess, the man says. Someone passed you a note. You nod slowly. He nods back. Careful, was it? You freeze. How did you... He waves a hand. They pass it every time some poor fool gets caught too close to something sharp. Or overhears something meant for someone else or just happens to be in the wrong place when the wrong dish is served. That's when the notes start. Always the same word. Same parchment, same ink. But who's writing them? No idea, he says. But they're not wrong. You stare into the fire, mind spinning. So what now? Now you sleep, he says. You're safe here. For tonight. And tomorrow? He shrugs. Depends what you remember when you wake up. You drain the cup. The warmth spreads. Your eyelids grow heavy. Your limbs sink. Somewhere outside an owl hoots. Somewhere beyond that a door creaks in the castle. Secrets ripple across stone and straw. But here in this crooked little cottage you drift. Full. Confused. But breathing. For now. The first thing you notice when you wake is that you're not dead, which feels like a minor miracle. The second thing you notice is that your stomach, after a long and furious night of threatening to destroy you from within, has finally gone quiet. It doesn't feel great, but it no longer feels like it's going to stage a revolt, and that's something. You lie still for a while, blinking up at the low thatched ceiling of the old man's cottage, listening to the early morning sounds creeping in, soft wind, a distant crow, the lazy jingle of a goat bell somewhere just outside. Your limbs are sore, your mouth is dry, and your brain is foggy like someone stuffed your skull with porridge. But you're alive. Fully. Definitely. Undeservedly alive. There's a blanket over you, scratchy wool, probably half goat. You sit up slowly, careful not to test your joints too fast. Everything's still attached. Nothing appears to be poisoned or punctured. You're in the same chair by the fire, which has burned down to faint orange coals. The cup you drank from sits on the table, empty now. No sign of the old man. You swing your legs to the floor and wince as your feet touch the cold stones. Then you catch sight of something new on the small wooden table beside the hearth. A folded note. Of course. You open it slowly, half expecting the now familiar single word. But this one is longer. Neater handwriting, black ink, straight lines. You were lucky last night. Don't return. Too many eyes. The kitchen boy talks in his sleep. Trust no one. A friend. You stare at it. You read it again and again. Then you fold it neatly and tuck it into your sleeve where the first careful note once lived. Your personal archive of anxiety is really coming along. There's no food in the cottage, but a small basin of water sits by the door, along with a rough towel. You rinse your face, splash your neck, scrub your hands. The cold bites through the crusted sweat and sauce residue, and you feel marginally more human. You step outside into morning mist and dewy grass. The goat bleats in greeting. A chicken eyes you with mild suspicion. The forest edge glows soft green in the morning light, and far off you can hear voices, distant but moving. You're not sure if they're hunting dogs or castle guards, but either way, they make you move. You walk. Slowly at first, then faster, trying not to think too hard about where you're going. Away is enough, but was enough for now. You've passed beyond the feasting halls, past the drunk laughter, the whispered plots, the roast meats and pudding politics. What comes next? You don't know. You just know it has to involve fewer trenches and significantly less danger of assassination by pastry. Let's take one last look at what you've survived. A 12-hour onslaught of medieval culinary warfare, featuring enough roasted game to repopulate a forest, sauces thick enough to patch a roof, a drinking schedule that would frighten a pirate, and political manoeuvring so casual and baked in that you accidentally became someone's messenger just by nodding with a mouthful of almond cream. You danced, you digested barely, You almost died a few times, and you managed to sneak out before anyone figured out just how much you didn't know. Here's your final historical bite. In medieval times, feasts weren't just celebrations, they were microcosms of the entire social order. Power was on display at every table. The seating chart could cause a feud. The wrong joke could end a marriage, and the wrong dish, if left on your plate too long, could be seen as a statement. These were dangerous places, not just because of undercooked boar or questionable custard, but because everyone was watching. Everyone had something to gain or lose, and the more food there was, the more politics came baked in. You weren't supposed to survive, not really. That feast wasn't for you, but you made it. You walk until the trees close around you, until the sounds of the castle fade into rustling leaves and birdsong. You come across a creek, cold and shallow, and drink straight from it. No fancy goblet, no mulled wine, just water. Clean, plain, glorious water. You splash some on your face and laugh out loud, startling a nearby squirrel into dropping whatever it was hoarding. You look down at your clothes, crinkled, stained, slightly torn. You look like a noble's ghost, or someone who fought a roast duck and lost. You'll need new clothes, a new name maybe, a new story to tell if anyone asks what you're doing wandering the woods looking like you lost a very aggressive eating contest. But you'll figure that out. You sit on a flat rock beneath an oak tree, stretching out your legs and finally letting your body go limp. The sun breaks through the clouds, pale and gentle, warming your face, and there, for the first time since stepping into the feast hall, you exhale without fear. No meat, no sauce, no politics, just you, breathing. You smile and burp softly. Of course! Yeah, you made it. You survived a medieval feast. A thing that was somehow both banquet and battlefield. Dinner and death trap, party and punishment. You endured the parade of meats, the suspicious sauces, the trenchers that doubled as sponges, the dances choreographed by chaos, and the musical stylings of a man with bells sewn into questionable places. You survived the politics, the puddings, and the possibility of being turned into someone's diplomatic scapegoat, all while slowly, violently digesting roughly 3 whole animals and a small cart's worth of bread. But now the fires are out, the laughter has faded, the music is gone, and in its place, silence. Blessed, belly-friendly silence, the kind that says, you're not in danger anymore, you're just full, emotionally, physically, spiritually full. So close your eyes, let the forest sounds wrap around you like a wool blanket. Feel the gentle breeze brush over your skin, free of spice and smoke. Your pulse has slowed. Your stomach, against all odds, has forgiven you. And the night is waiting, quiet and wide, full of stars and peace and no more eels. You're safe now. The feast is over. Sleep.